Welcome, everyone, to the special meeting of council, February 27th, 2025. We would like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Inca, Kappa, and Silk people. Late items, none. Public input, I'm assuming none. General matters, no. New business, 7.1. 2025-2029 financial plan service and line item focus. I'll probably read the recommendation after we go through all of this, but who do I hand this to? CEO.
So I've got a couple of things. We'll come back at the end and we'll be keeping track of any changes that you're going to give us direction on so that when we formulate the final resolution, it itemizes all the different things that you may want changed or not, right?
Okay.
So that way we have a very clear direction and we don't miss anything. And I think probably over there, they're taking notes and over here, we're taking notes on the same items. So we should have a comprehensive list.
Okay.
So I'm going to introduce this discussion tonight, and then Kevin and I will tag team through it a little bit. I'm going to read something, which I never do, right? I usually go off the cuff. So we're presenting you with the following priority-based budget recommendations based on the expert professional opinions of our senior leadership team and input from our staff. During the development of the 2024 operational and capital budgets, council was provided with a 5-year operational budget and a 5-year capital budget with a 10-year outlook. This budget set a course to ensure the sustainability of the community and to help council look forward to the need for infrastructure renewal long into the future. The recommendation was that an appropriate level of taxation, approximately 12% for 2 years, over the 2 years, and modernization of user fees, we could fund our operations without relying on reserve funds. This would allow for those reserve funds to grow and support planning and infrastructure needs for both the short and long term. This would occur without a reduction in the public facing services provided. So this is really important for the community to understand why we're setting the budget to council in this fashion. And that is to get us into a better financial position immediately, like within 2 years, which is pretty good. And then long-term savings being the goal. With a new leadership team, there's an opportunity to look at the organization with fresh eyes. This ensures that an organization stays vital and relevant, and in the case of the municipal government, ensures the best service provided as efficiently as possible. Sometimes this does not result in changes that the community immediately jumps on board with, but is essential to review how things have always been done and how they can be modernized to meet current legislative requirements and industry best practices. This is not to say things were being done poorly or incorrectly in the past, just that change is hard and it takes real effort to initiate and implement. In a public serving organization like a municipal government, sometimes there's just not the time or resources to do these evaluations or to make those changes on a regular basis. The culture of the organization and the room to do these evaluations comes from the top down, from council to the leadership team to every member of the staff. Staff who have the room to participate in bringing ideas forward and who are treated with respect and valued for the work they do are going to be engaged and take ownership of the work. This is the type of organization the city of Merritt strives to be. Since this team is formed, we have been actively engrossed in trying to identify efficiencies in the operations of the city. At times, this may result in cost savings, but in some situations, for example, with public works, work that has been left undone for many years due to insufficient resources and the loss of operational knowledge through attrition has been identified and now must be addressed before failures occur, both operationally and with capital work. It is vitally important for residents to understand that the requirements for operating a municipal government and how we must account to the province and federal government has significantly changed in the last 10 to 20 years. In fact, just recently, I think in the last 6 years, we have now required to have an asset management program of some sort in order to even access federal funding, including our standard gas tax funding or Canada Community Building Fund, which we generally have just gotten in the past without any requirements. And now we have to have an asset management plan or they will stop funding us, which is around $350,000 a year that goes to capital projects. This means that staff are taking on, we are also responding to climate change impacts and other outside forces that we have little or no control over. This means that staff are taking on more and more work, and in order to ensure that service levels do not see dramatic changes, additional staff may be required. I need to note that this does not mean that the staff do less when we bring on another staff member. It just means that they pick up the next challenge that they have been unable to address due to workload. We have also identified the need for redundancy in key positions so as not to cause damage to the organization should a staff member become unavailable. Our priorities have been to right-size the organization while keeping employment roles accessible to local residents. We were also focusing on new technology, how new technology can reduce operating costs and ensuring spending supports the work, best supports the work we need to do. We've removed 2 director level positions and are focused on ensuring the workforce has the necessary boots on the ground to do the work in all of our departments. A review of all our software and technology has been completed or is underway, and numerous cost savings have been identified through right sizing and modernization of systems. Some examples of that are we have gone through all of our Microsoft licenses and right-sized that license for the individual based on the position that they fill. At one point, everybody had a full license, and now staff that only need an email only have an email. So that's actually reduced our cost about $12,000 a year based on last year's 2024 costs. Obviously, every year licensing fees go up. And so we're trying to find things to balance that change. We're working through the process of now removing our desktop phones and going to software that will allow us to have our communications completed through our computers. We're also removing, we're not going to bring our servers back online. So we have 1 server left and we're going to remove it from, instead of replacing it, we're going to go to cloud so that we have some significant savings, and it's bits and pieces at a time that the IT department with their director Ms. Burke have been able to do, but every $10,000 counts. We have initiated our required asset management and maintenance management programs, which will help council by providing real data to support decision-making and investments. So this asset management program will help you to see what the cost of replacement of our infrastructure is over the long term and what kinds of investments we have to be making. Our maintenance management program will also show us the sort of balance between how much money we put into maintenance and how cost effective that is versus replacing a piece of infrastructure or an asset. We've brought several projects in-house to reduce consultant costs and used grant funding to create term positions to support updating bylaws and policies. We're also updating master plans internally to limit consulting costs while ensuring the goals are realistic and attainable. These steps allow us to do a much needed review and updating of development service bylaws, policies, and processes. A benefit of doing these tasks internally is that a wider range of staff get to participate in the work and have the opportunity to learn new skills from our highly experienced senior leadership team. It also means that these documents make sense to the work our frontline employees must complete. So as we go through this evening, we have kind of gathered up some of the efficiencies and increasing costs that we're seeing. So if we come to it, I will pull some of that out. I've got about 10 pages of things that staff have evaluated over the last year and a half to try and find those cost savings, or to try and identify work that unfortunately hasn't been able to be completed because of, like I said, lack of resources. Sometimes it's lack of funds, sometimes it's lack of human resources, and sometimes it's the loss of organizational knowledge that comes when somebody retires or moves on to another position. Our asset management program will help us to retain some of that knowledge because all of that work will now go into a workflow system that will be in the software on the cloud, and we'll be able to see all of the work that's been done year over year on infrastructure. When it's come into service, what the costs are, and what replacement costs are over year. So I think we wanted to start, Kevin, with maybe that waterfall slide, if we could. So, I do. So, when last we spoke, this was sort of the waterfall based on the decisions that you guys have made. We had started at 8%. And we had the 1% addition for our bargaining. That we didn't know prior to starting the bargaining process. We put the 2 RC members back to 17 being budgeted for. Again, not that we have 17 members, but that we're budgeting for. So that gets up there. We put the 7 days of pool, so 1% back in, have a pool every day. Then can't say what you've got to do that. We included the 3% that we would increase through the user fees increases. So that's additional revenue. And then we recommended a 2.25% contribution to Recreation and Parks Reserve to get that reserve started, which got us to a 12% tax increase. Based on our conversations on Tuesday night, when we looked at the summer student position, we said that was approximately 3/4, just a little bit less of a position or of a tax increase. So that gets you down to about, in and around 11.25. Based on the fact that the other option that the CFO gave you was to start with a lower or contribution to the Parks and Recreation and land improvements. And just so you know, land improvements is like playground equipment, buildings on our parks. Okay, so it's not, just so you understand the term land improvements. And so starting with a lower contribution, if you could slide that up for me a bit, Linda. We could get ourselves down. Now this shows 10%, but again, it would go at 0.75 contribution this year to the Recreation and Parks Reserve. Now, given that we just contributed the other night on Tuesday, $444,000 to the Parks Reserve via the insurance claim, council may feel now that it's prudent to look at this and say, okay, do we really need to go that high, that 2%, 2.25% in the first year? Ultimately, we want to get to 2.25% annually as how much is being contributed. And so that could look like a staggered kind of increase. So the CFO has recommended at least a 0.75% contribution, increasing contribution every year, which would then continuously be built into the budget. Next year would be a bit more built into the budget than the final year. So this is the starting point he gave you. I would recommend, having a real discussion about how much you want to put in. If you want to just put a solid % in, and you're getting just over $100,000 a year, or $100,000 this year, but then smaller step increases in the next 2 years to get to that 2.25. With all of that said, if we look at that, we get much closer to a 10%, 10.5% tax increase.
I thought at some point we had looked at over the next 3 or 4 years of we had 12% and then we were going to go down.
Yeah.
And then maybe up in the last year or something.
So the idea would be that these 2 years would be that 12% year, and then the subsequent years we should be back into single digits. How close we get to that mid-range of single digits will depend on many things like tariffs, which we can't account for at this time.
So question on the pool closure 1 day, and maybe this is a question for Kevin. What would the percentage of that be if we decided to move to keep the pool closed on a Monday?
That's a 1%.
So that would take us down to 9.
That would take us down to around 10 to 9.5, somewhere in that range. So ultimately,
And I have to be honest, and I don't know if everybody else, but nobody seemed opposed to the pool being closed 1 day a week.
I did hear from a couple of seniors.
Of course you will.
But that's their outing for the day, probably that.
But there's still 6 other days.
Yeah. So those are things to consider. I'm going to go back to my desk. And just talk about a few other things that we're looking at this year that we think are important for you to consider. So there is the potential to go to that lower level of contribution to Parks and Recreation and land improvements, because we have put in almost $500,000 in 1 year, which is a good starting point. A playground, doing a playground is, depending on the size, can cost you anywhere between $75,000 with surfacing to $200,000. So, You know, we have enough to do a playground as it sits right now. We probably have enough to do some improvements to some of the bathrooms and things like that. But, you know, that's the magnitude of what that $440,000 will probably get us. So those are potential things to think about. We're also going to be doing a real deep dive on the aquatic center. So right now, we haven't got a good grasp on how usage is happening. So I know from my staff that there are periods of the day where for a 3-hour period, there might be 15 or less people in the pool over 3 hours, like total. So there might be 2 people now, 2 people later, 3 people, like, so for 3 hours in the morning, there are less than 15 people who use the pool at any given time. That's not a really, and we have 2 lifeguards, a cashier, and a facility maintainer in the building. So restructuring some of that staffing to evaluate how much lifeguard staff we need is really important, as well as to identify, are there times, additional times that the pool should be closed because it is not being effectively used by the community, and as a result is being borne by the residents. That use is being borne by the residents. And that's really just staffing, right? Because the heating the pool, the chemicals for the pool, the equipment for the pool doesn't change. It's just staff time. So that's one consideration. A different consideration that council might want to consider is going to bi-weekly garbage collection. So there's not a lot of visible savings on that in the immediate realm, because we would take that staff and we would move them to other tasks. So things that can't get done right now because we don't have the human resources would now become more likely to get done. So things like pothole filling and crack sealing, weeding, you know, dealing with some of our trees that might need to be pruned and things like that. We just can't get to, and some of them are much lower priority, but do impact sort of the appearance of the city. If we go to twice-weekly garbage or bi-weekly garbage collection, the tipping fees don't really change. So there's not any real cost savings there because it's based on weight. So unless people find other ways to diverse their waste, so we could be looking at really backyard composting programming. And I know these things have been tried before, but just because they didn't get taken up on 10 years ago doesn't mean we shouldn't try them again. But backyard composting, doing a better job with our recycling, because right now we're still seeing lots of contamination into our recycling, or people who are putting all of their recycling into the landfill bin rather than the diversion bin. So there's some campaign work that needs to happen there to make our solid waste collection more efficient and cost effective, because every time we have a contaminated recycling bin that goes into the truck, it contaminates whatever's in the truck. So that means we don't get the funds from the Recycle BC funds, and it has to go to the landfill. So it's increasing our weight to the landfill. So there's not a lot of immediate cost savings. However, it does mean more things get done, and it extends the life of our trucks. So instead of having, you know, a 10-year life cycle for those trucks, we could see a 15-year life cycle. So long-term capital costs change.
Yep, go ahead, sure.
You hit most of my key points. Exactly. The labor and the equipment, landfill costs. I didn't know about the tipping fees. Lower carbon emissions because you don't have those trucks going around. Encouraging waste reduction, increasing recycling and composting, and reduce wear and tear on the infrastructure without the trucks.
And fuel.
So,
yeah, and I don't.
So there are ways, and I think it might be a culture shock to begin with. But
I do my garbage every 2 weeks and have been since the bin showed up. I just don't generate enough garbage for it to be out every single time.
And I think it's important to note, like the fuel costs we might see some savings on fuel costs and maintenance on those trucks. However, if we've got staff going out and doing more tasks, some of that fuel cost is going to get transferred to our fleet vehicles.
So just a quick question on this. And so if we do that and we have some free time with that, now we cut 2 seasonal that could be doing weeding and stuff.
Two summer students, not.
Yeah,
total.
two
gotta
summer students,
differentiate,
two
'cause
summer
there's-
students. Would that person be able to maybe jump into that position when the time, or is that going to be, they're going to be pretty much with something else?
I mean, that could be a task that's assigned to them.
Okay.
It would only be one person because we only have
I
one
get that.
person in the truck, right? So that would be one additional person for 5 days or for 10 days out of the month, essentially, who could be doing things. However, that might not be, normally we have two people on doing the seasonal or the summer student positions, which is mostly cleaning up the parks.
So this is residential garbage, not commercial.
Residential garbage only. And we haven't looked at commercial yet, but we could be looking at commercial and we could be saying that, you know, if your bin's not full, you know, we could start assessing how full bins are in a week. If your bin's not full, we're not coming to get them. Right? Like there's opportunities for us to evaluate this further. We all see a number of places where we are identifying regularly in our team meetings the things that we want to explore, but just haven't got the time to do all of them right. Like we've been kind of prioritizing where we're going, and making sure that our staffing levels are properly done, right? That recycling money is actually meant to be to have somebody come in and do recycling campaigns or waste diversion campaigns. But right now we're using it to offset some of our costs related to contamination.
Councilor Egan.
I'm sorry, I just put it on. I thought everybody was thinking theirs on.
No, I would do that because I can't decide who's who.
Okay.
So I just. Councilor Petrosi.
Oh, I was speaking to my wife about the bi-weekly thing and it's just the two of us. Easy at our house, easy. And I think probably 30 to 40% of the population in town, probably two people living at home, you know, bi-weekly would definitely work. So I'm just worried about the larger families, maybe. Four kids,
Yeah.
5 kids, a little bit worried about that, but otherwise I think great idea, great idea.
We do currently have two sizes of residential bins, correct, Mr. Green? So those households that need a larger bin, you can choose to pay for a larger bin.
Councilor Hogan.
Okay, so I think that these are good ideas to explore. So in order for me to have a good understanding of the impact that this may have in the budget, how much money are we talking about cost savings if we go to bi-weekly?
We wouldn't really see that until we have a year of it, right? Like we wouldn't know until
Any
probably the next.
projected?
Oh, gosh. I mean, ultimately, there isn't really a whole lot of cost savings.
Yeah.
There is the capital cost savings that we know will be extending the life, but because we're not, staff is the most significant cost of waste collection staff and tipping fees.
Yeah. So I think I tend to agree with that statement. What did we hear during the open house? And also with the emails that I received, over 165 emails, I got the impression that people were willing to pay the 12%, but not experience any cuts in services. So right now, somehow or another, this is a cut in the service.
Mhm.
So my other concern is that not only bigger families may be affected, but when I drive back from dropping my kid off, I can see on my days of garbage days that there are so many people, you know, with big bags, you know, almost overflowing the current bins. Recently, I got new bins for my residents, and they are way smaller. So I know that there are two different type of bins, but within the same regular size. The new ones are way smaller, so the tires are inside the container, so that is reducing the space. So
Mhm.
compared with the prior bin that I had, so the design is different.
Yeah.
So as a result, how much it can put, how many bags can you put in the bin? It's different as well. So before exploring any cuts in services, I like to explore your first option of how, like perhaps the pool or any other.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, these are just things that we wanted to bring to you before we really got into Kevin's part of the presentation around the budgets for each department and the capital budgets. We want to make sure that you understand that there are other things we can do, but they are cuts in service. And there is an impact in the pool, for instance, could have an impact on staff as well as the residents with a cut to service. So those are options we're going to continue to explore anyways, because we want to make sure that we're not paying for something inefficiently. We want to make sure that the best use of service. Like the pool closes at 7:30. People work till 5 o'clock, they go home, they have supper, they want to take their kids swimming. It's not, there's no time, right? So is 6 o'clock in the morning every day the important time, or is going until 8 or 8:30 at night the important time? And those are the decisions we have to make based on the stats. We already have a couple of times during the day they're closed, and those times could be extended. This is a small community to have a 24-hour, like, or not a 24-hour pool, but an open and close all day. This is a very small community for that kind of service. Imagine, because most people who use it are families and they're in school or working.
So if, being devil's advocate, if we decided to close the pool on Mondays, that would give us the full month of September back where we're not closed for 31 days. And then we would go through, or are we going to still shut down
We
in
would have
September?
to still shut down it might shorten some of the shutdown because we may be able to do maintenance on the fly, but there are still things that we have to drain the pool for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, just I wanted to be sure of that. Wasn't sure. Thank you.
So I'll get Kevin, and I can tag team through the next part, but ultimately, you know, we're this team and our managers and our supervisors and our frontline staff are all actively engaged in trying to improve our performances with the resources that we have.
So just on the pool, as a reminder, in your capital section, there is consideration given to the mechanical room mezzanine, which will actually extend the September shutdown this coming year. So long-term, there might be shortages in downtime related to closing on Mondays. But if we elect to do the mechanical room and all the projects related to it, that will be an extended shutdown.
So question on the mezzanine repair at the pool. Have we contacted TNRD for their share of that repair?
No, and I think you had some other people that you needed to speak to, and I think you and I just need to
Yeah.
have those conversations with those people.
The area IM director's made it very clear he has some money he wants
Yeah.
to move into the pool.
So, I
And
mean,
it is they are partial owners of that pool.
Yeah.
So anything we move forward from now on should be halved with TNRD.
and so ultimately, the same thing with the arena, because it is the Nickel Valley Memorial Arena. There are significant, like when we talk about doing the brine line replacements in 2032, something like that. You know, when we pull up that concrete, we have to pull out the boards. It will impact part of the stands, you know, so when we do these projects, this is the thing that the Director of Community Services is currently working with his managers on is what other things do we need to bundle together? Because if we're going to impact it, might as well do it right. Might as well build it back better than just leaving it the way it is when we build it back.
Thank you.
So we've already had opening comments from the CEO. The opening section of the report is really just to try and summarize the 2-year journey that we've been on. So recaps our committee of the whole conversation last year, in which we went line by line through every service that the city offers and some of the decisions that council elected to make during that time. And then some of the kickoff items that were brought to council in October over the course of these 30 lines of us trying to source and get back to the 12% that was originally premised. Any questions on the opening section before we get into the departments?
Councillor Egan.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back on page 19. You list out, if this is still in Parks and Rec. Oh, yeah. You talk about the aquatic center mechanical room, and then you've got tile valve replacement at 99. The first 3 or 4, 5 things, you've got them listed on top, and then you say in the next section, scope reductions and savings, and then you take them out. And then down below again, halfway down through the page, you add them back in again. I don't understand how that works.
So we'll come back. We're actually gonna audit that section yet, Councillor Egan. So we'll get to that section and the CFO can
Well,
explain.
we were talking about it.
Yeah, we were talking about pool, but now we're gonna go department by department.
Okay.
Any questions on the opening?
Okay, we'll turn our attention to the fire department for the first department. So as council can see, we spent about 1.6 million in operating costs operating the fire service. Some of the most important considerations that council considers in setting the level of service is the insurability for our residents and our ability to meet underwriter requirements so that they can gain insurance coverage. We do know that the fire department offers services that help partially offset the operating cost. So whether that's provincial deployments that we try and place in reserves to cover costs, or services to the TNRD and other areas. Most of the cost of running the fire service is people. So 3/4 of that cost is people. That's directly tied to the ability for us to offer insurability. We incur supply costs, so things like fire resistant pants and pullovers, Class A foam, medical oxygen cylinders, etc. And contracted services in terms of those oxygen refills, communications and radios, and maintenance on our facilities. We have equipment costs related to the running of our fleet as it relates to insurance, parts and gas, and some natural gas and electricity costs for our building. We have allocations of our property insurance to every area of the city, and that will include fire department assets. So there's 1% for insurance, and then 1% for all other costs. So that includes our Fire Smart program. So last year we were successful in getting a grant of about $199,000, and that covers almost all of the Fire Smart costs, with the exception of about $5,000. And so that's what's premised in other Fire Smart programming. The rest of that 1% is rounded out in terms of telephone costs, etc.
So I just have a quick question for the chief. It's very brief. What is the life cycle of our Scott Air packs before they have to be replaced?
So they're actually fun, sir. So I think that we'll get you there.
Oh, I was just wondering, do we do them all at once or do we stagger?
With this point, we're doing them all at once because they all need to be replaced,
thank
but we actually extended the life of them as for a bit. I do want to point out a couple of things. As the CFO indicated, level of service impacts people's insurability in the community. And one of the things that we do is the very creative work that the chief has done and that is now being stolen by other communities is the work experience placement program. So when we compare to what, say, a first year firefighter in Kamloops makes, and they're unionized, that's about $125,000 per year for firefighter. So if we were using career firefighters who are being hired as new firefighters, if we had 6 of them, as we do with the WEP program, we would be almost at $751,000 per year. Our current costs that we put into the WEP program is about $130,000 per year for salaries and about $35,000 a year for uniforms and different educational opportunities. So we see a savings because of this program of $586,741 annually because we're able to use the WEP program. If we wanted to offer the same level of service without the WEP program, we would have to hire 6 firefighters. If we did not do that, it would drastically change our rating with the fire underwriters. So people's insurance would, I don't know, double, triple, may not be insurable depending on how far away you are. So the WEP program saves us a considerable amount of money annually, and it's very well subscribed to by candidates. Yeah, chief.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The chief forbids me to talk about this at UBCM because he doesn't want the secret out, but it's too late.
We also this year are, instead of, so in the budget last year, or for 2024, we had doing a new master plan for the fire department, and we've decided, the chief and I and his officer staff, we have decided to do that a bit more in-house. Instead of going back out and getting a consultant to write a master plan, which would be the same as every other community's master plan, we're going to do a strategic work plan. We have 3 major things that we know need to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And those are the 3 focuses that we're going to be looking at administratively, and breaking up into a work plan to get done. We have goals for up to year 5 and then goals up to year 10. And those are related to making sure we have all of our appropriate documents and procedures in place and guidelines in place, preparing for the potential of a new fire hall and training ground, which we think could be a revenue generator. And then getting a fire underwriter survey done in the next basically at year 5, because we need some time to make sure that all of the appropriate infrastructure is in place. Fire hydrant checks, all of those things to make sure that we can get the highest rating of our fire underwriter survey. So those are the 3 big projects that we know are attainable and actually actionable with the resources that we have. I think that was $50,000 we took out of 60. Thank you.
So on the capital side, council will notice that I've attempted to integrate the 2-year view for reference. So when we went through last year's budgeting process, we had the initial presentation, and then we met during a committee of the whole meeting in January and made decisions around what would be grant contingent, what would be funded, what would have timing shifts, etc. So I've attempted to summarize what was in last year's bylaw and then bridge you to what's going to be in this year's bylaw, which is where any new information is presented in our presentation in December. So we're still premising engine number 2 as part of conversation over the last week with the supplier. We do note that the chassis payment has shifted to 2025 and the actual delivery and final payment will be 2026. So while this table currently ties to what was presented to you in December, the bylaw will have a timing shift. Chassis will be paid in 25 and the delivery will be 2026. Chief's been working with MOT or MOT or whatever they're calling themselves now on the Nicholas signalization. So that carries over, and hoping to deliver that in 2025.
Same thing at the post office. You did
So
the thing,
currently, trucks have to back up into Nicola Avenue with no blinking lights or signage warning traffic that the fire truck is either entering or exiting the fire hall. So this project would alert traffic along the highway that the truck is coming in or out. So I believe MOT has.
We have that permission from OT because it's their highway. So we're just working through the process on
So
it.
just to show the process, we have received, we've asked for it down by Canco. It's been now 2 years. It's been approved. We're still waiting for the final situation. This is how this goes. It just comes into a waiting period. We've been on that, Rick and myself, for almost 18 months. We've gotten verbal approval from Brad Bushel, but until the engineers sign off, we can't move on it. And it's a monthly thing that I get to MOT. Where are we? Where are we? And this is the hurry up and wait situation that we get with these kind of things. So you're right. You saw it last year. You'll probably see it again next year.
Sadly.
Yeah.
So the final element is the ladder truck. So if council recalls presentation in last budgeting cycle, we presented not just the bylaw view, but a forward-looking view for information purposes. And the ladder truck would have been premised outside of last year's bylaw window. It's now in this year's bylaw window, and we're recognizing the significant lead time that is being required for the delivery of trucks. And oftentimes that includes making a chassis payment early on in the procurement process. So we have updated the ladder truck timing to be a chassis payment 2027 and the delivery in 2029.
Councilor Attorney? Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
Councilor Attorney?
can I just,
Oh, yep, go
I
ahead.
think it's important when you're looking at this as well to remember, we have no way to account for tariffs. So we are working to try and find Canadian sources for as much as possible. And working with some of our procurement, outsourced procurement specialists around that. But at this point, this number could be significantly higher.
Councilor Attorney?
The engine 2, I thought it was more than 900,000. It's just 900,000?
No. So
Or is that the 2
there's
you
a
add
carryover
together?
component.
Oh, that is the carry, okay.
So the sum of last year carrying over and the
1.8.
payment that was initially premised in 2025 is 1.8 million.
Okay.
We are now shifting the timing of those payments by a year. So the chassis payment that was premised for 2024 will now be 2025. And the delivery payment that was premised in 2025 will be 2026.
Okay.
So still 1.8 million, but a year shift for both payments.
On the ladder truck, are we putting money into reserve for? No,
So this is where the protective services reserve that we've discussed is going to be really important, because at this point, we're not putting in reserves for these kinds of things. We're not, they could come out of general reserves, they could come out of borrowing. But if we're taking the difference between what we're budgeting for RCMP services and what we're paying for RCMP services and putting that into reserve, it doesn't solve our problem, but it gets us,
Lessens it.
lessens
How
what we
much-
have to borrow.
How much is going into protective reserves for a year for
We
the
ha-
three?
We haven't had any yet, right? So if we do that this
No,
year,
but once you,
I mean, ideally, depending on how we're charged for special operations in the community. So when they have a major crime incident,
Mhm.
you know, we could be looking at $350,000, $400,000 a year if we have the optimum outcome. And they don't fill all our positions, right?
and that's just, okay,
Mhm.
okay.
So one other thing that we have to realize, when we do have an incident in the community where a team is brought in, PTEP, we pay for that. And it can be as high as $150,000. Now, the RCMP does a good job of trying to claw that back, and Josh has been good at that to a certain degree. But that comes out of our pocket. Every time you see a kicking of the doors, that's extra. And we have to pay it. Now, I've talked to the minister about the PTEP funding going from March to March, which doesn't really work for us. If they could change that or open it a little differently. And they're looking at it because it's not working for a lot of communities. But the PTEP funding comes out of our pocket. And there's no telling when that's going to happen. The shootout thing and the chase, that was very expensive. Not yet.
We get paid, and we may not get paid back the full amount.
Yeah.
Right? So there's only a certain amount that is supposed to be allocated for each community, but depending on which communities are using those funds, we may get more or we may get less. But that eats into our contribution to reserve every year when we're dealing with those excesses that we can't budget for. Or we could budget for, but again, you'd be asking the taxpayers to pay that without knowing whether or not we're going to use it.
So as part of trying to identify the priorities for reserve savings, we've had to think about what's actually possible given the time that we have left. So water sewer were identified as our top priority, and that was executed on last year. If we decided to save in tax for the fire truck, it will be an extra 7% on the levy for 5 years. And we already have a challenging taxation environment that we're working our way through. And so debt financing is available on the fire truck, and then those payments then become part of the taxation in those years.
Councilor,
Not a lot of time left to execute on saving for that truck. As it relates to the protective services reserve, we also will have a second building that we're going to have to be navigating for our insurability at some point. That has yet to enter our financial plan bylaw because we don't have the ability to premise the funding and our ability to execute on that at that time. So the protective services reserve, I'm hoping that we're penciling in the start of that second building within that reserve to the extent that it's possible. So debt financing available for the truck. We need to start thinking about what that building looks like and creating that path for that being viable. The protective services reserve could be the start of that savings plan. And we're going to need to build on that over the next few years.
Councilor,
Just have a question on the ladder truck with the fact that we have to move towards building taller buildings. How high will this ladder reach?
So the ladder truck, I don't think we're changing the height of, or the size of the ladder truck. We're working through making sure that there are different methods that people are having to deal with developing higher, right? So they have to have a different set of development requirements for the building so that our team can get in there. So we don't necessarily have to go up. And I mean, may not want, I think, Chief, we can go up to six is where we're at, five
5 stories?
5 stories. And we might not be a city that wants much more than that, right? That doesn't make sense to build 10 or 20 story buildings here.
We might not have a choice.
Yeah, well, this is true. But it would ruin the view.
Not my view.
But yeah, so as we go up, those are definitely considerations, but we don't see them now. The biggest thing is that with that second building, we may not have a choice. Again, with fire underwriters, when they come and do our assessment, and in the chief's professional opinion, we're likely to be required to have second building, which isn't just about a building. It's additional staff, it's additional trucks, it's additional equipment. However, the chief is working sort of on the side with a few potential co-investors to develop a joint use facility, as well as potentially that training facility that we think we'll be able to build a business plan to get that as a bit of a revenue generator as well, that training facility. So,
Councillor Hogan.
Thank you. So I personally like tax seasons, like, when we are talking about how much is going to be the tax increase as well as budgeting.
Mhm.
So because we determine what are the priorities per department. So, and this is a fact, we are not allocating money towards protected services yet. So when we talk about graphic number 2 that you went over, in that graphic, the total tax increase was going to be around 9.5, correct? So, and if we were able to add 1% towards protected services, we would still be under 12% and putting money aside. Because again, we have to talk about priorities. It's good that we are putting money aside for parks and recreation, but protected services is there. And again, so we will have to discuss about what other area needs to be, some savings so that we don't have the major impact in future years.
so I think if council, Mr. Mayor, if council thinks about that, if we decide that the amount that we put into parks, recreation and land improvements means that we don't have to start so high on our increase for that, then that does get you that 1% per year at least, in addition to whatever remains in our payment from our budget for RCMP. It gives you a guaranteed 1% plus whatever we get from the RCMP budget as residuals, right? So that, again, we're not sure where that's going to land you now that I don't do the math. We're somewhere around less than 12. But there's that option to do that, to balance it between those two reserve funds. It gets both started, and I think CFO, I can't remember, Tuesday night I blocked it out. Did we put some of that insurance into the reserve for protective services?
For the fire department.
For the fire department, yeah. So specifically, but again, it wasn't, I think it was 300 and a bit. So less than $400,000.
I'll take that.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, but we're a $13 million just operating
I
budget.
understand Councillor Charney.
CAO brought up my thought also, if a new building, equipment, personnel, etc. Will getting money from 286, if we ever do, will that help? How are we progressing and how does that look?
So we haven't seen the assessment for the Mako building yet, right? So that land improvement, we don't know what that's going to give us in regards to their assessed value and how we're going to get, how much tax that's going to generate, right? This is like when we lost Tolco, which was a major industry, a lot of the burden shifted over to the residents. So the same thing will happen with development. So as Mako comes online, as 286 comes online, we have a couple of other things in the pipe right now. If those large industrial centers or commercial centers come online, then that shifts the tax burden back to them versus the residents. And so there will be an increase in our tax revenue if we do it carefully, but not greatly reducing the burden on residents while still gaining that additional tax from industry.
Yeah, but I was kind of veering on the 7.5 million. That they,
Oh, no, we don't get,
we're not getting anywhere on that.
no, we will, but that's not real. That's not real.
The intention would be.
That's
that
not real
the
money?
Annual payments make our debt payments.
Oh.
So there's
no money.
zero sum game as it relates to the actual.
So it's just Peter
parcel
paying Paul.
tax.
Yeah.
We're not making.
Not real money, Councillor Charney. In
Not
your
real
words, not
money.
real money.
The benefit would be in non-market change, such as development CAO's reference. So
Yeah.
as improvements get added to the land, that taxability will increase. And then we get to make decisions on what we do with that.
Much like
So-
the 2.5 that the CFO was able to get for our GST rebates that hadn't been done. That's already in our budget. It's not new money. It's not spending. It's not additional spending money. It just covers what we're already getting.
I have a question for the chief. We are looking at a new ladder truck, retiring the older truck. We know that at some point we're going to have to do another fire hall. Can we use the older fire ladder truck for the new, like, do we have to actually get rid of that truck or will it still be able to be used?
Chief, if you want to come up, that would be fine.
And the only reason I'm asking is because I think if we have to remove that truck, we need to sell it and we have return on investment, no longer giving our trucks away. So I was wondering if, if we could start storing it for when we have to use it later on. Now, I know we're based on capacity pump for the community. I get that. But I'm just wondering, would that truck be able to be used somewhere else for us, or is it just off the books?
Thank you, Your Worship. To answer that question, if we're looking out, when the truck retires in 2030, it will no longer have a pumping capacity, but the latter portion of it can be non-destructive tested year after year and still be used for that purpose. It just would never be considered in our pump grading by underwriters. The issue is that we don't have a place to park it or store it, right? So
I do. I have a place, but I'm not going to tell you about it.
Well, and I understand that. So I guess the idea is, I just thought if we at some point had to have a new fire hall, it might behoove us to hold on to that. But if it's not going to work, then what's the point?
what I can tell you right now on the designs that we are considering for the new ladder truck is to keep it on a single axle. And the reason being is to make it fit in the current fire hall, because we're not going to be looking at a second facility in this time frame of delivery. So the intent is that we're going to go to 100-foot ladder truck and it'll be on a single axle and still fit within the bay space of the current fire hall, because we can't predict the future 100%, of course.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
But we are going to sell our equipment from now on. We're no longer giving stuff away, right?
We will make every effort to recover any costs through sales of equipment.
Councillor Baxter.
I'm with Councillor Owen. We need to put some reserves, even if it increases by 1%, so that the fire hall could possibly or save some money so that we can save money in the future.
Councillor Egan.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe if the ladder truck is no longer suitable for, except for maybe getting somebody off a roof, we could also use it for training. You're going to have a training center there.
Any other questions?
So as we move through each section, we'll be looking for direction from council that we can recap at the end. So we've heard now from two councillors regarding the potential for savings in reserve related to the fire department. Notionally, I believe 1% was referenced. Is there any direction from council overall on adding a reserve for the fire department within the budget?
Councillor Sherman.
Well, I don't agree with adding another 1%. We're already taking 3% from our protective services. So and you know, that's up at 12%. I don't think I want to increase another 1%. So I'm comfortable with continuing with the 3% from the protective services from the RCMP. I'm not really willing to add another 1%.
Hold on. Councillor Hogan.
No, I just want to clarify that all what we are discussing here is under the 12%. We are not adding an additional 1% for that specific protective services.
I believe the intent was for it to perhaps, instead of going 2.25% this year for recreation services and parks and land improvements, instead of going hard there, maybe you break that up into 1% there and 1% to fire, because it just helps. It guarantees, right? We can't guarantee that we will have a surplus from the police budget because of all the other things that we can't control, right? Like large scale operations. So if council decides you only want to do 1% in the recreation, et cetera, reserve and 1% into fire, that still leaves us below 12% of taxation. It gets us closer to about 11%.
So we're talking about diagram 2, option 2. Or
Option 2, but adding, well, really option 1. But doing 1% for rec, et cetera, and 1% for fire, and not adding that other 0.5 or 0.25. And then every year we could look at budgeting, you could look at increasing and adjust a little bit more every year.
No, but we're taking out the 1% for the Monday closure.
We haven't decided that yet, we're gonna decide that in recreation. Don't rush
I have
us,
to think in terms of that, you know, if you're gonna add something else, think about what you're gonna do.
but we're still, so if 12% is our max,
It
right
is.
now, we're below 12%, if we do 1 and 1. Okay, so you're below 12%, we're only going below as we go here.
Councillor Richard.
I somewhat agree with the statement that Councillor Charney has made, but also not knowing what events could happen with the police if we have other expenses that come from protective services. So because of the unknowns that have happened over the last year and the costs that we've had to pay for that we might not get reimbursed, I think the safe thing to do is to have 2 even contributions, 1% for protective, 1% or 0.75 for the parks and recreation, and that way we're still contributing. So at least when we put it out to public, we're saving for these specific items, because the fire hall and the equipment and the costs, if you want to be compliant with FUS, fire underwriter survey for fire rating, you have to have these new equipment pieces within 25 years. So we're probably better off to start saving somewhere, because likely we'll still end up below 12%. Then we have some savings in place. And if we end up with a bit more because we have less events, hopefully, then we have more savings. So I think I'd do the 1% as well.
Thank you. So are we agreed on the split of the 1%? Everybody's cool with that?
So 1% reserve contribution to fire services.
Yeah.
Thank you.
1%.
We'll get, yeah, we've got that in the. Got that in the notes. We'll try and keep everything sort of section by section.
Thank you for that explanation. Appreciate that. Moving on. CEO, do you have your mic on? You have something? to say?
Of course I do. I'm just leaving it on
Okay.
so I can interrupt people.
The council will notice as applicable, the service view and a line item view have been prepared as it relates to service. So for public works, for example, many different services are provided within that team. I've used a tree map diagram so that we can hone in on where the bulk of the money goes. So you can see on the left-hand side and on the top that about 6 services represent about 3/4 of what we spend within public works as it relates to solid waste, roadways, street lighting, the airport, and our fleet. A lot of the operating budget relates to human capital, providing services. Tipping fees paid to the TNRD, wages and contracted services as it relates to our roadway. In relation to the airport, it's important to keep in mind that some of that is fuel that we purchase and then resell at a margin. So not all of that is a net cost to our taxpayer. And then the operation of our fleet. You'll notice that there's a box for 69,000 in other, and I've broken that down for you as traffic lights, sidewalks, decorative lighting, flags and banners, diking, EV charging stations, in-kind work, and vandalism. When we look at things on a line item view, people represents about 44% of the operation of the services. On the contracted service side, we employ people as it relates to line painting, roadway surface repairs, our mosquito program, the airport, and the operation of our garage. Equipment includes the cost of running the fleet. So again, insurance, parts, and gas. Natural gas, electricity, and fuel will be more significant in this budget than they will be elsewhere, primarily for 2 reasons. You saw on your tree map the 221,000 for street lighting. That is the electrical bill for providing public safety street lighting throughout the city. And then, of course, we've also got, as I mentioned, the purchase of fuel at the airport that is resold at a margin. 80% of the supplies and chemicals are for key services such as snow clearing, our garage operations, roadway surface repairs, solid waste, street signs, and the airport. You'll notice that the other doesn't quite fit on the graph, represents 1% for insurance, and 1% for all other lines. So we have telephone costs, we have credit card merchant fees at the airport, so all of the pilots purchase fuel, we have to pay a fee for that transaction. We consider that and how we set the margin. And then we've got the subscriptions for our radio licenses.
So I think there's a couple of key things I want to highlight here. One, we've made some improvements in our fees and charges bylaw around airport use, which so we're more likely to do some cost recovery on some of these things if we see the same level of use of the airport as we've seen in previous years. The other one that that Kevin will refer to regularly in everybody's departments is the insurance. And we know that since the flood, we've seen our insurance rates triple. Kevin, the CFO, I'll use your official title, sir. The CFO has done, and his team have done a great deal of work to try and source other providers for our insurance, property insurance. And we're looking at seeing probably $100,000 in that range, $100,000 of savings once we have our a new provider. So hopefully that works out. We're still in the process, but that's kind of the value we'll see in that work. And it was a great deal of work to try and get those insurance premiums down. We'll still see a very high deductible, but that seems to be the trend across municipal governments at this point, that $50,000 deductible.
So I've had a couple phone calls from upset pilots about the raise of the tie down fees. So I've done a lot of work and a lot of research, and we are fairly close to where we need to be. There are some airports that are charging $275 for tie down fees, but they're charging $1,550 for every takeoff and landing. So if you do 10, that's another 150 to 200. Most pilots usually take off about 25 to 30 times a year. We don't have landing fees here. So our tie down fees, Princeton is $1,800. So I've tried to soothe the beasts up at the airport. But also too, the one thing we cannot allow is that airport to become a parking lot. It's got to be used. And if you're going to pay to store your plane, fly your plane. Other than that, then remove it from the airport if you don't want to pay the fees, because it becomes a parking lot. So we're one of the very few airports that do not charge landing fees. Very few.
Yes, I did a pretty thorough look at airports our size and slightly larger. And we are in, like when we talked about cemetery fees, we are undercharging for a lot of that. But again, we don't want to drive people away. So we're trying to find that balance point.
The other thing that I would point out is that last year we used the airport for non-airport activities such as the drag race, the Gymkhana event, which wants to return. So we do make a little bit, we are focusing on the fact that the airport can make us some money as well. And we continue to push that forward. So I think that's one thing we need to be aware of, is that we're always looking to use the airport for something.
Yes, and a little bit of revenue generation is better than none.
Yes.
Are there any questions or direction?
Councillor
level
Kern.
of service changes?
I'd just like clarification on the garbage truck. In the 2024, 2025, we had, or to 2028, commercial garbage truck for 2025 at 450. Then in 2026, now we have residential garbage truck at 450, but we also have a carryover of a residential truck at 441 for 2025. So it looks like a carryover of a residential garbage truck for 2025, and then another residential garbage truck in 2026.
I believe that is actually the case. I think both of our garbage trucks are at end of life.
Well, did we not discuss the fact that we were going to have two smaller garbage trucks, one to pick up regular garbage, one to pick up recycle? Did we not discuss that? Because what's happening is we're getting cross-contamination
Well,
of the operator.
we're not getting cross-contamination typically by the operators. We're getting cross-contamination by the residents. Our operator error is very low.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just saying I do believe we talked about this, and Mr. Green, correct me if I'm wrong. We talked about two trucks, one to do one and one to do the other, and they were smaller. Is that my recollection, or am I confused? Thank you.
Okay, so we are getting one in this year and one next year.
So it was premised for 2024. I believe we brought a report
carry
to
over?
earlier in the year in terms of the foreign exchange impacts that we were seeing at the time. We were desperately trying to lock in the pricing on that truck. So there was a resolution in 2024 to update the cost to 441, and the delivery of that is now slipping into 2025.
Okay. Yep.
Hold on a second, Counselor Eaton.
Just want to ask, how old are these garbage trucks?
Mr. Green, do you have a sense of the age of those two, the trucks we currently have?
And the lifespan is supposed to be
About that.
10 years?
So when we look at it, we have an expected industry standard that we look at for useful life. And then we say, you know, based on the amount of mileage that it gets. But if it starts spending more time in the shop, then it would cost to replace it. Then we start looking at it potentially an earlier replacement. But with a garbage truck, for our size of community, you're sitting between 7 to 10 years for useful life. And we're trying to maximize how far out we go with some of these. So again, if we're looking at a 10-year replacement cycle and we do bi-weekly garbage collection, then we could extend that. We won't double it, but we could extend it up to another 5 years.
The age of the residential garbage truck in 2017, we went to recycle bins and pickup. And that was my second to last year of council is when we got that truck. So it was 2017. It was delivered in 2018 when we started picking up garbage and recycle. So 2018 is when it arrived.
So not quite 7 years old.
Not quite 7 years old. And by the time we get replacements, you know, you're at least another year. And now we're seeing longer to get these replacements. Obviously, you're seeing it delivery slip into the next fiscal year.
Counselor Trent?
Could you give me clarification on the airport fencing and was this through a grant or is that through
Yes.
taxes?
And so I think I've mentioned somewhere in my opening comments that because we prepared the initial budget presentation in December for council, that carryover would need to be adjusted and the capital budget will be reduced for work that we were completed. So we were completing some of those projects right up through the end of December. That grant has been completed and we have filed the final report. We have accrued the final payment as it relates to 2024 in our financial statements.
So we can take 100,000 off this amount?
Correct.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we will update this carryover when we present the bylaw. So we're just in the process of closing accounts payable as it relates to invoices for 2024 activity. And the carryover for any work that was completed through December will be adjusted.
Okay, and the airport lot grading, was NVIT not doing this free? They're not?
This was a grant that we secured as well.
Oh, so this is a grant?
What you
Okay.
saw up there was a school that was operating on a piece of property that is not part of the earthworks that we did for that grant. That was just a school that was brought in to
Okay.
work it.
Okay, can I continue that?
Yeah.
Juniper erosion repairs, 350,000. In the 2024 budget, it was 71,000. So,
These are not necessarily the same project. 1838 Juniper is listed in your December package for the actual repair.
on December 9th.
Yes, the
Okay.
verbiage is on the top page of the new request for capital.
Okay, I'll have to check on that one. Is the Coldwater Avenue and Vote Blair Street at 7.3 million, is it still on the books?
So is that the East Merritt utility
East
core that
Merritt
you're
utility
referencing?
That's, oh, they changed, okay, you call that east.
We call that the East Merritt Utility Corridor. So I think we're looking at efficiencies there.
So during our committee of the whole conversations last year, that was an overall $40-ish million project over many years. Council elected to proceed with only the sewer component as it related to that project. So anything that was listed in the initial presentations last year related to active transport, roadways, or water was removed by council during that committee of the whole. The only thing that remained in the budget bylaw up until that first gray line was related to the sewer.
Okay. Okay,
Keep going.
so now we get to the ugly part. Trying to reduce our tax rate. And since we're not reducing staff and you know, we're not reducing some other areas. I looked at the grader and the columbarium. The columbarium was originally 130,000. And then there's reduction of 40,000. Scope reduction savings. So that gets 90,000. Could we have some information from Mr. Green with regards to the grader? And if possible, can we cut that for another year?
Sure, Mr. Green. Can you give us a condition assessment of the grader?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, one of the things about the grader, it's fairly old. I think 2005, I think, is a year on that thing. And they're a very finicky thing and it doesn't have a lot of strength to it right now. So we're running a bit of a gauntlet with that thing right now of whether or not at any given time it's going to create a $50,000-$60,000 engine problem or $80,000 transmission problem. So it was proposed basically to upgrade it with a better used one and then sell that one so that we can avoid the potential for large scale breakdown on that old unit. Now, if you want to, it's already been approved from what I understand. We're already actually shopping for one because it was in the budget for last year and no numbers have changed. So we haven't done anything with it yet other than we're sourcing. So if it is something that you want to push, we're running that. It's risk, right? Like anything else that's older and got some hours and is finicky. Graders are a expensive thing to play with. One of the issues I am thinking about is when we upgrade it, you know, that's not something that our guys work on anymore. So even most of the work that has to happen then becomes a heavy duty mechanics from Finning or John Deere that have to come and work on it because these things are complex. So it's a bit of a worry. That said, a good running grader should be the busiest machine we have around other than the garbage truck.
So the
It is very
used,
underutilized because it's weak.
250 is the used amount? You were
Yeah.
saying a used amount.
Yeah, we should be able to get a green puff with under 6,000 hours on it. 3 years old for that kind of money. It's just a matter of finding it.
Mhm.
So,
And
Will that have the GPS connection on for the blade?
yeah, most of the new ones are all pre-wired for that, just whether or not they're equipped with
Right.
it. Usually with that, it's based on if they're doing earthworks construction is where you get the value of that. Most of them now have grade control, which is percentage grade largely on the blade, not necessarily GPS to do grade control, but it'll manage your actual crossfall and blade angle. So,
Which means it'll do better.
So last year we had some conversation around new versus used. And so we identified the fact that we would not be able to use debt financing if we went with a used option. So we have the equipment reserve on our balance sheet. That's roughly 250,000 that we have not touched, and we penciled in the grader for that. If we elected to go with a new option, we would have higher cost, but then debt financing would be available. So currently we're premising using that equipment reserve for the used grader.
Did we not push the grader last year? I thought we did.
So we approved it for the 2024, 2020.
Yeah.
9 capital plan. However, the choice was to go used. They're still in the process of sourcing that. We haven't purchased. So we could, if we wanted to take the risk. But once we've blown any of the engine or any of that stuff, there's less chance we're going to be able to sell it. And if we don't have it, we will have to bring in contractors. So we can take some risk here if you want. It depends on how risk adverse you are versus how daring you are.
Councilor Egan?
I just wanted to know if you considered lease to purchase. And maybe you could get new.
Well, I don't want to butt in here, but we decided that we would be going used from almost everything. We decided that last year. So that's the whole
Okay,
idea
yeah.
is used and sell what we have for ROI.
Leasing is an option. Some municipalities do a lot of leasing, but it doesn't necessarily save us a lot of money.
It's the end when the lease is up is where you get nailed,
Yeah.
right? That's the boomerang.
the interest rate on the leases are not usually very favorable either. So,
Okay.
Myself, I have no interest in going with a grader that's the sold. I think we should move on the grader and get the grader done. before we end up with a problem. I mean, I used to work in an open pit and I know what these can cost, so.
Yeah, and quite honestly, the issue we were discussing when we were in Colville this morning. Yep, with a good grader with some power to it. Give me 2 hours and I can have that thing all fixed with a grader, but we don't have a grader that can push all that, so.
Mr. Attorney, any more?
The asphalt trailer is, that's something that we could push to next year.
We pushed it to this year already.
Yeah, I know.
once.
I saw that.
This
With
comes
an
to-
inflation added to it.
Yeah, so this is an operational efficiency thing. If you want more efficient pothole patching and better quality of pothole patching, this is a tool that will allow them to sort of run down the road like the basic, monkey gypsy type thing, doing everything all at once. And they'll be able to run a lot faster. The material will be warm on the fly. Right now, they're warming asphalt or cold mix with propane torches. And believe it or not, we're getting injuries from that as well
Yes.
on a regular basis, which isn't great. So between safety and performance, and we got nothing but potholes right now. It's one of
Yeah,
those
that's
things
great.
that speed costs money. It's how fast you want to go.
So I
So
think pushing it 1 year is
I
enough.
think so enough. What about the columbarium? What's the occupancy rate?
those are 40 unit columbariums. 40 unit.
And
Yeah.
so one of the reasons the columbarium has been a priority, and again, this is council's decision, is that we're running out of actual put it in the ground space. So we need people to shift to using the columbarium for ashes.
So versus the space that we have for the cemetery, you're not going to expand you would versus getting columbariums?
No, there's already an expansion area out there with burial plots.
Mhm.
The upgrade we just did for the columbarium site, that we finished construction on in the fall has pads ready to place the columbariums now. And, it's also got the scattering garden. We have a little bit of finishing work to do because we've tried to save some money by adding trees and finish work ourselves to make sure that we were within the budget that we had talked about. But basically it's, the columbarium we have now is getting utilized. We need to get the next one or the next two onto their foundations ready to go. Then that corner's done. 5-6 years, depending on usage, we have to go back to the plan for the other larger site that got pulled due to it coming in well over budget from the estimate. We're still going to need a lot of sites over the 20-year plan. If you look at unfortunately, we're all getting there. Trust me.
We
I
have
know.
and don't forget, we do have 25% of our population is in the senior category.
And the other thing that I put out there, one of the biggest requests I get is the care of the cemetery. From the
Yes.
people in this community. They're very passionate about their cemetery. Just on a note, tomorrow at 11:30, there's going to be put up the wind phone booth. It's not actually opening it, it's just the booth going up. And it's collaboration between NVIT, the high school, and the society, the Hospice Society. So if you've got nothing to do at 11:30, it's not the actual opening, it's going up. And it's nice to have this collaboration at 11:30 if you've got nothing better to do. So.
And if you haven't seen the site, really good opportunity to go
Yes,
see it.
beautiful.
So why you saw the price come down on those things, I found an error in the original quote
Okay.
that one of the numbers was doubled on it. So once I got clarification, we were able to lower the number. So
Is there anything in this budget that you could potentially say, I can do without this year? That's like asking, do you want Santa Claus not to come?
well, and recognizing that anything we put in there is not for us, they're for the community. I mean, they're for your strategic goals. The cutting has already been done to the best of our ability of what we think we can skate through on. We've gone through that whole process already to reconcile the numbers and what we can live and what we can't. I haven't proposed anything I didn't think is fairly important. If you look at the juniper outfall, for instance, if we don't do something with that soon, we're gonna have a conversation about a house on the golf course soon. Right? These are things that when we look at the importance of them, and yes, I can prioritize. I don't have the entire list in my head right now, so I'm not sure I could go through it and tell you yes or no, but I know I've already done that work and prioritized what was most important.
And if you look at, you know, the difference between our core services, the things we must provide, water, sewer, roads, garbage collect, or solid waste collection versus nice to haves. If you think about that, there's very little here. The only maybe nice to have, although there might be some safety issues related to it, is the pickleball court resurface remediation design. But at some point we have to do it because it is going to become a safety issue for that facility.
And that right now is the thumb suck because we haven't even started on the design work to figure out what we have to do to it. It's one of those ones that has not been prioritized for action. So if there's money there, chances of it happening in the near future, you know, you can definitely push that one because I haven't even started on figuring out how to
Can't
get it
talk about
fixed.
Pickleball.
But that's not a pile of money, I don't think. on
Yeah, it's
that
only
anyway.
It's only 16,000.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it does then move us out of
Mhm.
having to plan for the actual work, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily show here, but ultimately, you know, that is a nice to have. And this is a very big list. This is actually probably too big for us to accomplish it, which is why the director is saying, you know, we do have to prioritize. Once we get this approved, we still have to prioritize it in actually getting it done. We put this to you now because these are all significant issues that we probably aren't going to be able to get done in 1 year. The number of things on here for 2025 is too many.
So also too, I was called to pickleball last year to have a look at some of the issues. And if we don't do something with that service and somebody gets hurt, we're looking at a liable situation. That's a whole lot more than $16,000.
It is a use at your own risk
I
facility.
understand that, but you know how that works, right?
Yep.
So Councilor Egan.
Yes, could you explain the River Ranch Road Mill Inlay Lane channelization?
So I will be bringing to you a traffic assessment for that area. That should appear a couple of years in front of us, does it not? On the plan? It's not next year.
No,
is
it's
it?
not.
It's scheduled for 27.
Yeah, so the general idea is the pavement in that area is getting to the point where it needs to be milled and inlaid. So in the past year, we've done a study that involves how to deal with the intersection. There's a concept that will, if you approve it, will end up in the OCP for a 5-leg roundabout, cleaning up that whole area. So when we do from Boat Street down to Forksdale, what's Canadian Tires on Forksdale or is it Forksdale? If we have to do the pavement there, that's the time to initiate the recommendations of this traffic study that I had commissioned to channelize, remove left turns that are backing traffic up into the intersection, move things down, around, back up to access without blocking traffic up in the intersection. So it's a time to fix some of the things that are more maintenance related that we can deal with on a small scale before we look at the big solution of a 5-leg roundabout and medians all down the middle and really widening it out. So there, you'll see a 3 or so stage plan. When I bring it to you, I just haven't had time to write the council report to get it in front of you.
I've read it. It was painful. Number of things that they identified as issues was like, and if you're coming from a left turn on this road, to do this road, and then this is a problem, like, there isn't, it's a very complex
That's
problem.
up by McDonald's? you're
Yeah,
talking about?
that
Oh, I
intersection.
thought you were talking about going down Nicolay here.
No.
To River Ranch,
No, this is
because that's. pretty
basically from the
horrible.
time that area started developing to the traffic is generating now. It's very dysfunctional,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Councilor Petrosi.
Rick, could you speak to the upgrade vote and Gordon to camera detection? Just kind of, what was that about again?
So that was an approved project that was in the 24 budget. I've been having a little bit of supplier issues with that. However, the pavement loops in that location have all failed. So I've got the lights set on a time cycle only
Oh,
right now
okay.
at that
Okay.
intersection.
Yep.
And we want to get out of the loops and put the detection up top.
Easier to repair. Without
Thank you.
having to pull up paving.
Are we done with that one?
Is that, so I guess the question becomes, in that particular one, is that something you want to deprioritize from this year's budget? It will have to get, it should happen at some point because it will help traffic flow. And people have complained and feel they feel inconvenienced by it as in its current state.
I'm happy to leave with exactly what we have in there.
Okay.
Unless there's. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is call a break here for about 5 minutes so people can go to the washroom. We've already been in here an hour and a half, so
Oh, that
5
was.
minutes. We're back. And we're off. CFO.
So we're still currently discussing public works. I don't know that I've tracked any direction or changes at this point.
No change. As far as we can see, I don't think anybody's
Ready to transition to the next department or? So next up, we have the water service. Have provided the views regarding how that service breaks down in sub-services and on a line item basis. The water operating budget is funded mostly by utility user fees. And as the council has seen, staff are advocating that we update those rates annually to make sure that we are cost recovering and starting to build reserves for future infrastructure. The majority of the operating budget relates to the human capital providing the service, the chemicals and supplies needed. Think sodium hypochlorite used in the chlorination of water, and then the electricity costs for the wells and the high lift pump stations. Contracted services includes weekly drinking water sampling for the community. So you're looking at the graph, there's two small wedges at the top, don't fit. It's about equipment, which is 2% of the operating budget. So fuel, parts, insurance as it relates to fleet within the water service. And then the other breaks down in terms of overall 3%, 2% related to insurance for pump houses, reservoirs, etc. And then 1% across all other lines. So that's groundwater fees, licenses and permits, and our telephone costs. Questions as it relates to the water operating budget? On operating.
So quick question, CAO, are we cost recovering right now at this point, or we will be once we have the next increase next year?
So we spread the increases over 3 years, actually. So we will be cost recovering by 2027. But that's only if there's no significant change in costs, right? We don't know how, again, tariffs might impact pumps or chlorine or any of those things coming into the service.
It
So-
may delay the cost recovery.
It may
until
delay it a
2029
year or
something.
two, something like that.
Like,
Any other questions on operating?
So capital, similar format. We have the projects that we considered in last year's bylaw. Primarily, that's our annual maintenance capital for things like hydrants and valves. As council has seen, we did approve the KenGuard project. We've seen from my grant writer and I that we continually look for funding sources for that project. So we weren't successful on the big one last year, but we did secure $150,000 grant towards the design costs. And then in this week's council meeting, we've got the next opportunity that we're targeting for about 3.9 million towards it. In the adjustments that gets you to this year's bylaw, you'll notice that the director has really tried to challenge the annual operational requirement, what can be done every 2 years instead of annually, things like that. So you'll notice adjustments that try and really right size that operational capital component. We've got some carryover costs as it relates to the pipe bridge replacement and the KenGuard well design. KenGuard well design, as mentioned, we've got some grant funding for, and we're now trying to package that in with the wastewater treatment plant so that we've got really crisp design documents and can be really competitive in the grant process for those two infrastructure elements. Some of the new items that were premised in the December presentation include the boat park UV and electrical room separation. So if council recalls, in the summer last year, we had water spraying all over the electrical equipment at boat park. Had water restrictions for a period of time. This is to do some of that separation in between our electrical equipment. Is there any questions on water capital?
If I could have the director come up and just give us a bit of update on the pipe bridge replacement, because we have found some cost efficiencies there.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good news on the pipe bridge front. We've done a bit of utility modeling, which is something that we've initiated a lot more over the last couple of years. You've seen that in the budget. And we've identified that instead of replacing that infrastructure from Quilchena all the way up to the Nicola Reservoir, when we take the segment out where the bridge is, we don't lose a heck of a lot of capacity. We end up with a couple of deficiencies up in Grandview. And then we modeled it with a slightly upsized pipe from Nicola up to the Nicola Reservoir. And we gained more than what we lost by taking the pipe and bridge out. So right now we're moving our design to removal of the bridge altogether, decommissioning of the line from Quilchena, and only replacing with a fused HDPE from the bottom of the hill up to the reservoir. And that's where we get the bulk of the leaks. And from what I understand, there's been a couple of issues with the pipe bridge in the past, but my expectation where we're sitting right now is that number is going to cut in half for budget. So I just can't guarantee it until I get the remodel design done. So little bit of asking a few of the right questions and testing a few things, and voila. When we had the bridge inspected, the abutments that are sitting on are what's failing. The bridge structure itself is actually quite unique once you tear all the insulation and the piping and everything out of it. And the bridge engineer actually suggested that we salvage it, strip all the other stuff off, and then we can repurpose it as a pedestrian bridge at some point with very little work. And it's a very neat bridge when you look at the actual structure.
So we're imagining sort of along the wetlands area adjacent to the Nicola River, that land that we own there that we can't currently access, being able to develop in the near to long future, we get grant funding, particularly some sort of interpretive walking path through that wetlands area.
And that'll be off the end of Charters across from Central Park into that area where we have the river cutting off a couple of pieces of property that we have. So anyway, that's evolved quite a bit over the last time, and very much to the point of efficiencies. We're challenging a lot of people now on rethinking convention on what we do and testing different theories out. We spend a bit of money, some you win, some you lose. This one we're winning. So
Thank you.
Okay.
Good work, as usual. Councilor Sharney.
Well, since you saved, Mr. Green, don't go away.
Oh, I just missed him. Sorry.
Oh, I'm
I didn't know you wanted to talk to him.
Yeah.
Apparently you're back up, sir.
Oh, I want to say congratulations, saving us 400,000. I won't be so hard on you right now. So, I
I'm done.
just have some clarifications.
Okay.
Just clarifications. So there were 8 projects that were carried over from 2023 to 2024. The water master plan update, active mountain monitoring infrastructure, the Nicola Reservoir piping design, Nicola lift station upgrades. Now, these are now listed for 2025. How come they took so long? Were they just not a priority, or?
It's a matter of how we're prioritizing with the staff that we have and the ability to move on. So in a lot of cases, we prioritize other projects such as the Volk Street upgrades.
Yep.
That was something that in the past was really pushed, so we put our efforts into that. The West Merritt Active Transportation Path, I've been working on construction of that since about 2 weeks after I got here 2.5 years ago. So that one is going to be finished up this year. It's generally grant funded with, I think, a matching contribution of some sort, but that one we're just tendering out. Actually, we just awarded the tender to a contractor to finish it up, put the loo in and do all the appurtenances along the pathway that we can afford. And we had to keep adjusting it, chasing prices to only put in what we can afford to do. And then, if we're $20,000 under on the grant afterwards, I buy some more lights or I buy some more something and just go pop them in to make the number hit bang on.
So I think I mentioned in the last slide around capital projects, there are too many capital projects for us to get them all done. But they're in the budget because they are all relatively high priority. So when you neglect capital, which again, every municipality is in this situation, when there's no money for capital and infrastructure replacement, there comes a point where everything becomes higher priority. So for us to say that any of these are not a priority is very challenging. That's why you get to make the final decision on capital work. We can keep all of these things in and see how much we get done. And then there's carryover if we don't get it all done. So it really depends on the capacity of a department at any given time. We don't want to add in a lot of additional consulting work unless we think it's a very, very high priority. So we might not bring in another project manager if we don't think it's a very high priority. But if we have many high priority things, then we have to absorb the cost of a project manager to come in and manage the project. So it's really a balance between, there are way too many capital projects on here for a community our size. And for the staff resources that we have. And in order to make sure you know they're a priority, they're there, there's yours to make a decision on. And we're trying to reduce how many we use external consultants on or external contractors to run the project. You know, we already have to use consultants on design and testing and those sorts of things. But if we bring in somebody else to manage projects, there's going to be a significant cost there as well. So it becomes a balancing act. We get done as much as we can, depending on what those projects are. Like, for instance, the director is now grouping KenGuard and the wastewater treatment plant design into one project to get solutions rather than having somebody just bring us design. They're investigating solutions and costs of those solutions concurrently. So we get some cost savings there because we're doing a bigger set of projects rather than doing them off individually. Right, so we can find some efficiencies in that way, but there's no way in 2025 that we can get all of these things done.
And the other thing to think about is a lot of these projects have a lifespan that exceeds the year that they're funded in. You know, you have to do preliminary work, you have to do design work, you have to get permits. You've noticed a lot of that with the recovery work as well. Some stuff, if you hit the timing right, it can get done in a year, but they have a lot of construction has multi-year component to it just because if we start from scratch, it's going to take, that one construction season, in a lot of cases, just to get it all ready, tendered in the fall, then we started in the spring or whatever. So
Yeah.
Just because it's budgeted in 1 year does not mean it's getting done there. It's funded, it's moving forward, but each project moves forward at its own pace. And I'm a bit of a mother hen on these things, and that's what I like to do. So I'm not giving up that work. Middle of the night, I got time to do stuff, so.
Okay, what about the Grandview Heights Reservoir repair and the KenGuard PLC upgrade?
Grandview Heights, sorry.
Grandview Heights Reservoir repair. They were carried over from 2023 to 2024, and then they just kind of poof. So I just wondered if they got repaired, because I never saw anything.
You'll probably notice, I believe that one was actually predates me being here. And when I've talked to staff, if it went poof, it's because nobody knows what the project was. So it was proposed by a previous director and nobody knows what it is.
So that's for the KenGuard PLC upgrades too?
That actually is getting done, I think, or did it disappear? I think it got done.
Okay.
We'll go back to on that. I think the other thing too to think about when we're prioritizing is we have to prioritize granted projects because they have a timeline, right? So if we have like the active transportation project, infrastructure wise may not be our highest priority, but because our grant funding will run out,
You have to use it.
we have to use it by the
Yep.
deadline. Sometimes they'll give us a year or two extension, and I think this one has had an extension.
Yeah.
We're not going to get more than one extension on most of these projects, especially as we're getting to that place where government might change. We're unlikely to get any extensions now.
And if I may, when you look at the history of a project, this is one of the things that carries forward. The active transportation path was not held up by the contractor. It wasn't held up by city staff. It was held up by Fortis, who would not give us permission to build. And oddly enough, when we did the design, they told us the gas main was here. When we started doing the work, the gas main suddenly showed up underneath our work. So months.
So their
9 months.
as-built were incorrect.
9 months. Well, it wasn't that. It was, they gave us design information to design it. And then when you did the BC1 call, they came out and located it right underneath our work. And it was supposed to be on the other side of the road. And then that was a 9-month delay. So lots of things hold up projects. Some of them, especially if they're, critically failure related, those are the ones we put our shoulder into, or if they're your big priority. Other than that, we prioritize and get a whole bunch of them in the stream at the same time. And I just juggle and keep the balls in the air and keep moving forward.
Councilor Egan.
Yes, well, you're talking about the Gulshana Alley water main replacement, is that between, say, Spirit Square and Black's Pharmacy, that alley?
No, I think we noted the roads where it's between
Creeks
actually in the thing, did we not? But yeah, it's down farther in the residential area. And I think we've been in there, what did the report say, 3 times since I've been here fixing it. And yeah, it's an old galvanized line. It's rusted. It's probably a source of part of our excess water usage on a continual basis.
Would that be perhaps why we're getting so many sinkholes all along there?
Yeah, I would suggest that, especially anywhere in the old section of town where it is all that old galvanized pipe. We did one in front of the Clapperton Manor across from the trailer park there a month or so back when it was still cold. Dug that up, and that was an old galvanized service line over to the apartment building. The leaks were underneath the pipe, so basically it created a sinkhole. In other areas, the water comes up. If it's clay, it's gonna surface. We see it. In this case, that pipe could have been leaking like that for years and nobody would have known. It just took that long for it to move fines around and for it to finally consolidate. They found one, fixed it, turned the water back on, 2 feet apart from that. Oh, look at that. There's another one, right?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. You may be back.
So move on to sewer. So we've again provided a breakdown on subservices within the overall sewer operations and a breakdown based on line item spend. Similar to water, sewer is funded by utility user fees. We'll continue to make that assessment for cost recovery, future infrastructure every year. Majority of the sewer operating budget relates to the human capital providing service, chemicals and supplies, and contracted services, including ground well quarterly sampling. Equipment represents 3% of the operating budget. It's a little bit higher than other areas, but you've got to remember that this includes the composting site. So we've got loaders, mixers, etc., that are falling into the sewer service. Other is 2% overall, includes 1% for insurance. So think about the wastewater treatment plant, lift stations, etc., and 1% for all other lines. So our licenses, our permits, and our telephone costs. In terms of capital, it's mostly annual operational capital. You'll see that we have made some refinements to that again, trying to right size that for the city. Other capital projects include the composting site safety improvements. And as mentioned earlier, we did leave the sewer components of the East Merritt utility corridor in the financial plan.
Questions, Councillor Egan?
Yeah, the compost safety improvements in 2026, 243,000. It's a big jump from this year.
I do believe that is the,
So when you're looking at this one, we have the carryover, but we've also have an increase in scope of 47,000. But what we're seeing is that we had plans for things that we were going to do in the first phase. And then the 243 represents the second phase. So remember that there's the building, the roadway, the proper creation of the bays for the composting materials, water lines so that we have firefighting water down there. So I think that what we're looking at there is you're looking at 2 phases of work.
Okay, and the other question I have, which just isn't really mentioned here, is we talked previously about contracting out. I just wanted to know how that ended up.
I think council just had made a decision just to leave it as it was because we couldn't necessarily find any cost savings.
How many quotes did we get?
We had 3.
Yeah.
Okay. 3 different solutions, in fact, I believe, that they provided, correct? There was 3. Oh, but we had 3 sort of, we could kind of identify 3 different options.
And part of the conversation, was obviously there is a market for that, but we would have to look at allowing them to go much bigger scale. Kind of things, so we can talk about all that, when you do it, and you're figuring out.
Yeah, so the cost, the value to private industry would not work with the size of our current facility.
Okay, thank you.
any other questions, sir? Oh, Councilor Charlie.
Again, query, in the 2024-2028 budget, there was for this year, dewatering equipment replacement. I don't see it this year.
So we had the committee of the whole conversation in the budgeting process last year. So between the first draft of the budget and what's presented on the top section of the capital reconciliation, we made changes. So all of the plant capital was removed by council, and we agreed that we would finally start saving something towards reserves. We don't have financial ability to execute on the plant today. So we removed all elements of upgrading the wastewater treatment plant on the condition that we begin saving the parcel tax for future upgrades and replacement. So that was done at the committee of the whole conversation before the financial plan bylaw was adopted by council.
So we're risk managing until we can come to a solution of how we're gonna do the whole thing and fund it.
So that means the aeration pipe replacement, the headworks replacement.
Yeah.
I mean, that headworks replacement is huge. That's 13.5 million.
Mhm.
You know, so we're really going to have to start buckling down on those ones.
And this is where we
This
have
is
to have,
millions.
we have to have, this is a 30, or sorry, what did we say? This is a 60 to $80 million project. We have to have 30 to $40 million to grant match. So whether that comes from reserves or comes from our ability to borrow or some combination thereof. We had pulled all of that out and we're risk managing it until we come to an actual plan and a solution for how we're going to do it. So what's the best plan to move the project forward and how are we going to fund it? Certainly, Mr. Green, please come on up.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in addition to the committee whole decision, part of that was based on all that original budget information was put in out a report that we had. And that report had all those different components in a priority order, priced out. So we put them in the life cycle of the budget out through 2029 or whatever it was at the time. Since then, with the thought process of let's challenge some of the things that we're looking at, we're doing the same thing with KenGuard, is because those are getting pulled, we need to get better definition on what we want to do. Maybe there's a more economical solution. Maybe it's not a $60 million plan. Maybe we can do things differently. So we're engaging a specialist consultant now with the dollars that we have available to work our way into design, same as KenGuard. It's let's not do the $8 million thing the report said. Let's challenge it and see if we can do something that's a Merritt solution, not just a thumb suck at something. So we're going to work our way into full definition of what needs to be done, how it's going to be done. Because when you start breaking down the entire plant and all those projects, you got to ask yourself, how do you get that done and still operate? Right? You pull all that stuff apart and you put it all back together. That takes 3 months. Where's all the sewer going for a while? So we have to come up with an actual implementation strategy that's supported by design. And that's the other part of why all that's gone is we're working on that right now to get better definition in what we're building. I fully expect we're probably going to be able to downsize an initial solution with the idea that that gets going and it twins our our existing operation. And then later on, we'll be able to build the capacity to the growing city by refurbing the other one. I'm thinking that. I'm hoping that's the way it works. And then we end up with smaller units that are built in redundancy. When one breaks down, the other one can get most of it without getting your ankles wet. Picture that. Okay.
With also the consideration that we also have to move electrical off the ground floor and all of those things, right? So.
Any other questions?
So at the open house, we shared some material with the public regarding our current savings level. Parcel tax is currently increasing 5% every year. And we did an illustration to get some feedback on what it would look like if we increased it to say 15% after that first couple of years at 5%. So at 5%, we will have $11 million after 10 years. We need at least 30, right? So you can infer that we've got about 19 million in debt coming our way. So we had agreed initially last year that it would be 5% increases for water sewer parcel tax for the first 3 years. And so I hope that we consider our ability to escalate that savings curve after we're through these 3 years. And so that was part of the reserve station at the open house, is to get that feedback and present that view that even 15% is only really getting us to 20. There's still going to be a debt component as it relates to the plan. So we really have to prepare ourselves to be ready to focus on that almost exclusively as it relates to debt and increases in reserve contribution.
Otherwise, we end up also having to use our unrestricted reserve if we don't have the room for borrowing, which means any other projects that we are potentially using that for are on the back burner.
Moving on, sir.
In terms of parks and landscaping, currently we operate this as one overall service. As previously mentioned, we will be separating out Central Park for tracking purposes as it relates to conversation with stakeholder groups. So council sees a line item view. The majority of the costs for parks and landscaping are the people providing that service. In terms of contracted services, it includes vegetation management, janitorial services, security alarms, fire sprinklers, etc. Supplies and chemicals include the remaining flower budget. So we did some right sizing as part of last year's budgeting process. So the part that wasn't cut is still in the budget, and other supplies necessary, fertilizer, pro mix, etc. Natural gas, electricity, and fuel is 2% of the park's budget. Then other includes 5% for insurance. So we've got playgrounds, maintenance buildings, sheds, washrooms, etc. for facilities. And then 2% for all other line items. So that's public safety for tree trimming, limb removal, our telephone charges.
Last year we cut the budget in flowers. We cut it in half with the end goal to be more hardy, drought resistant plants. How are we on track for that?
Did execute on the revised scope. We also considered our ability to do some of that growing in-house with the greenhouse solution on the capital side.
And I think you'll note that in places like Spirit Square, there was more grasses, natural grasses that were planted there. We have additional plans around this. Part of this will be covered under the ECDEV placemaking project about what people actually want to see as our as how we present ourselves landscaping wise. We're also looking to work with the Arts Council to look at some art installations that might take up some of that landscape space. So sculptures, rock garden kind of creations. There's a dragon or a snake or something in
Rock snake
in Rotary Park that has been put in as one of our public art installations. So there are opportunities as we move these things forward to shift more and more to that sort of the desert landscape.
So we are shifting more and more
Yeah.
to eliminating flowers.
Yeah.
Great. No, I wanted no flowers. No flowers, please.
Moving on, here we go.
On the capital side, you will notice that there's a little bit of trading in terms of prioritization. We're trying to stay within the overall budget. So there's some projects that we've tried to move up in the priority list, and we've traded those off against lower priorities, such as concrete pads for picnic tables, etc. One of the changes versus last year's plan, you'll notice, is the Rotary Park spray park replacement. So we pushed that out a little bit. We were running the gas tax down to essentially zero in terms of our reserves by the end of 2026. So shifting that out in timing allows us to manage some near-term projects and manage the gas tax reserve financially, given that that's plugging all of the holes where we haven't been saving historically. Some of the other new projects include some upgrades to some of the bathrooms and just making some of the parks a more comfortable space for the public to resume using, such as Lions Park, etc. Questions on the capital side?
Councilor Charney.
It doesn't seem like you're spending much money this year, really.
Good, then I'll just shut your
I,
microphone off.
no, listen, don't get nasty, don't get nasty. Irrigation clocks upgrade, they were budgeted for 2024. Should that have been in a carryover or is this more irrigation clocks upgrade?
So that was listed as a new request for this year's budgeting process. In our December presentation, we had irrigation clock upgrade is proposed for 2025. Clocks have reached end of life and become obsolete.
Yeah, because in 2024, we had irrigation clocks upgrade 32,500.
So that would have been a project that got pulled by the time we made it through committee of the whole. The director has felt that that project should be reconsidered by council and therefore appears as a new request for funding.
Okay, so we don't have that funding already in place. Okay, okay. Okay, and other than that, it doesn't look like there's much spending at all. 48,000 then. So, yeah.
So one of the things that I think is important for us to talk about is our safety surfaces for our playground structures. So we're finding that the tiled safety surfaces aren't as standing up as long as we'd like them to. Same thing with the rubberized surface on the spray park. So as part of trying to reduce, like, we don't want to replace the rubberized surface on the spray park because it's actually not meeting our needs. Many spray parks just stay concrete. It's not, maybe a kid gets a little bit more concrete burn, but that's childhood. But those are huge costs that we can make decisions about what that level of service looks like. So there is potential for us to look at other safety surfaces and find cost savings rather than going with the rubberized safety surfaces like you have at Central Park.
Funny story, when we first opened that, it was cement and we changed it to rubber over the years. And then we found most people are pulling the rubber out now, going back to what we actually had in the first place. So I have no problems with that happening. Councillor Baxter.
Well, that's considered Rotary Park. So how much do they put in towards the infrastructure?
We're just exploring that agreement right now.
Anyone else? Moving on, sir.
Transition to development services on the operating side. So operating revenue of 260,000 we do generate outside of property tax for building development and plumbing permits. So not all of these costs come out of the taxation levy. As you can see in the graph, costs primarily relate to the human capital providing the service. We do incur some contracted service costs for legal fees. Equipment costs are 1% of the operating budget. It's too small to get into the graph, but it primarily relates to the building services vehicle that our building inspectors use to go out and do inspections. Supplies, again, very hard to see, but it's about 0.5% of the operating budget. And then there's 1% for other operating costs. So that includes all the land title fees that we incur to access the land title system in the province and our telephone costs.
Any questions?
Transition over to corporate services. So on the corporate service side, this is big enough where I've tried to give a breakdown both at the service level and the line item view. So as council can see, we have the IT service, we have corporate services, we have council or legislative services, and then the communications team all within this overall service. On a line item basis, contracted services are used in the operation of our IT department and in communications and engagement, things like website hosting for the city, etc. Other operating costs is bigger, and so I've got the breakdown of that 22% for you. 14% relates to computer software maintenance, 4% relates to advertising for the community, 2% relates to grants and aid, 1% relates to council sponsorships and scholarships, so things like the 2 scholarships for School District 58. And then there's 1% for all other council costs, protocol, etc.
Questions? Moving on. Okay. Councilor Rogan?
I just want to make sure I. We are in corporate service, correct? There was a discussion when Protective Services did a presentation and we were going to explore some type of contribution with TNRD. Right now, the impact to the budget would be it's 35,000. Was there any communications with TNRD that we were going to facilitate that conversation with them?
Is this in relation to victim services within the RCMP budget?
Right, yes.
So that's not general government yet. This is
Okay.
just general government right now, but
And, but it's within that budget, is it 35,000? Yes.
so in the RCMP, you can see I've got 99% of the 4 million related to the RCMP service. And then there's a small little wedge at the top of the graph, and there's a
That's the
comment that says the
protective service.
RCMP budget includes 35,000 or 1% for
Okay.
victim services.
I'll wait for that.
So that went to UBCM for resolution, but there wasn't a successful provincial funding mechanism. So I do have it in here still for council consideration.
Thank you.
Are we not proposing that as a motion and at Silga again?
No.
No? So
To be 100% honest with we were basically denied right from the start. There was no interest to even talk to us about it. We were basically shot right down before we even started.
This particular motion has been coming to UBCM since 2011 with no response from the from the province, so.
can't believe it. Victim services.
So on the protective services side within corporate services, we've got contracted services and people costs. Contracted services primarily relate to community cleanup and the associated legal costs that we incur in those processes. Equipment includes insurance, parts and fuel for the bylaw truck. Supplies are 1% of the operating budget, and that includes safety supplies used in the bylaw service. And then in the other space, we've got CPO programming costs and telephone costs.
Any questions? Moving on.
We've already
Oh,
covered.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm just gonna quickly, this is a place with protective services. Once we have finished getting our fine bylaws done, we're just waiting for, when is it? In April 4th, our MTI. Oh, sorry, our bylaw, notice enforcement bylaw will request to be added to the legislation for us to be able to use the bylaw notice enforcement will be in front of the ledge. And so once we have that in place and we've updated some of our other bylaws, like our traffic bylaw, we'll actually able to start issuing fines and have a proceeding for people who don't pay fines. So there's an opportunity to generate some revenue after doing a great deal of public education to make sure that people understand that they're making a choice that's not in the best interest of the community, and as thus they're going to have to be responsible for that choice.
Sure.
Point 4, it says other includes CPO programming costs. If we no longer have a CPO, that would be removed, right?
No, we have CPO. She's just moving into the building. It's we're repurposing the building, actually.
So I think it's prudent for council to just keep those costs there this year, no matter what, because we don't want to leave that building unattended at Spirit Square for the time being. So you will see bylaw will be moving in there. So to have a better presence in that area. And then as we get through the process of trying to refurbish or reimagine Spirit Square, we'll be bringing that in. So we're hoping by the end of the year, we'll start to see all of our community safety services moving into our building as soon as I can find space for them.
So council has made their level of service decisions on the RCMP. So if we're good on corporate services, we'll transition to community services. So again, community services is big enough to try and provide context around the breakdown on service basis. So think of our big three in terms of the pool, the civic center, and the arena, and on a line item basis. This area also does have all of our smaller facilities, so Spirit Square, the CPO building, Cadet Hall, Bailey House, etc. You can see when we break down our operating costs, that's primarily related to the human capital that are providing those services. We do have contracted services for activities such as servicing the boilers at the aquatic center, chiller repairs at the arena, linen services at the civic center, from rentals, etc. Supplies and chemicals primarily relate to chemicals for the aquatic center, the propane for the arena, and supplies for our recreational programming team. Given that the other is a little bit bigger in this area, we've got the breakdown as follows. We've got 4% for insurance across all the facilities. We have 2% for the museum contract, so that's a $50,000 annual payment that we make in 2 installments. We've got 1% for our recreational programming, so that's things like music in the park, Canada Day, kids camps, Easter, Halloween, etc. We've got 1% for telephone costs, and then 1% for all other lines. So we incur credit card merchant fees for payments at our recreational facilities, such as the pool and the civic center. And then we have license permits costs for operation of those facilities.
Any questions on that one?
Transition to capital. I know there's been some commentary that we need to spend some time here, so I'll try and explain a little bit about what we're trying to communicate. So the very first half, up until that first gray bar, is what was in last year's bylaw. You'll notice wherever you assign grant contingency in that committee of the whole meeting that I have marked that for you. If you assigned it grant contingency and the director of that area wants council to reconsider that, such as for the mechanical room, where we have an opportunity during an extended shutdown to do all of the projects and some of the ones that would benefit the customer facing side of things to reconsider. So it's in last year's bylaw, so it appears in the first half. I have then included adjustments to have you reconsider it for actual funding. So no longer grant contingent, but it appears as a new request because you didn't provide guaranteed funding for it in last year's process. So if you see something listed multiple times, it's to try and have a conversation around council considering actually funding the project in this year's budget. Things like the mechanical room, if we're going to be closed for 2 months, provides that opportunity to do some of the work that customers would actually see when the facility reopens. They're not going to see the mechanical room. So part of the director's thinking is that it would be nice to have a few of those customer facing projects done when the facility opens to help have them see the benefit of a 2-month closure. And so that's why you see projects appearing multiple times in the reconciliation. It's because we're actually asking for it to be a funded project and not grant contingent in this scenario.
Councillor Baxter.
How much is the TNRD gonna give us? So we're just making this on our gut decision.
Because we don't have an extended contract with the TNRD for replacement and repair or renewal of these buildings, we will have to seek out that engagement with them once we have a better sense of what the actual costs are going to be. Again, we also know that the area directors may have some that use our facility may have some funds available through their program transfers from the TNRD. So those are things the mayor and I have to massage, but ultimately the mechanical room work is not optional. So we're asking you to just do these other things, approve these other things. If we get additional funding, yay. We're looking at some energy efficiency funding that we may be able to get as well around the boiler replacement and things like that. So there is still, just because it's no longer grant contingent, doesn't mean we're not still looking for money for it. But ultimately, we can't leave the mechanical room as it is any longer. And so the ask to do the rest of the stuff is because when you shut down for 3 or 4 months, people want to see something.
So just to touch on that, the TNRD director approached me about helping out with the cost. So we have to iron that out with them. So they did approach us. So I don't think there'll be a problem with the cost sharing. They're anxious to get rid of the money, which is great for us. So we'll, Cynthia and I, our CAO and I will, I'll have the initial meetings with them at TNRD along with Scott Hildebrand to find out exactly where we fit in that mold. And then that would have to come to TNRD and, well, it's discretionary spending actually. So I don't think we'll have an issue. It's just what that number would look like. I'm going to ask for half. That's simple as that. So, Councillor Charney.
Would that, do you think that funding will be in place for this year to help reduce this cost? Or are we looking at what we get putting into a recreation reserve? Or
The director has
how does
had,
that
the
look?
director has had that money in his funding for close to 4 years.
So if you did mention the $400,000 range?
Well, whatever the, I think it would be fair and prudent for us to ask for half, considering they are partners of the pool.
So if you add up the mechanical room and the projects during extended shutdown, if we add those up and then divide them by half, that's,
That's what we would be shooting for. And
okay.
they were very cognizant about being part of the repairs.
So how does that affect our decision here? If we're pretty sure we're going to get some money, because then that reduces how much outlay is going out. So how does that?
Currently, we've reworked all of the projects that are being funded out of the gas tax to try and get through the next 2 years. So we basically were running that gas tax reserve down to 0 by the end of 2026. And that's
no.
where we shifted out the playground a little bit to leave a little bit of a buffer. But essentially, if we were able to get grant funding either through the TNRD or other sources, it would simply allow us to leave more.
It's
in
just
gas
Peter and
tax
Paul
reserve,
again.
which allows us to have that available for other projects.
Okay.
Right? And so it's not that, to everyone's point, that we're not going to continue trying to find other solutions. All it does is leave us a little bit of optionality in the gas tax reserve for other projects. Because
Okay.
we basically run that as far as we.
Yeah,
we
I wouldn't
can.
I wouldn't be counting this chicken quite yet.
So he's
There's
not
a bit of
hatched.
work to go yet.
So with Mr. Green, which of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 projects that the public would visibly see? Oh, he's not, oh, where's Mr. Zach?
He's on family stuff.
Okay, yes, okay, Mr. Zackel.
Yes, ma'am.
CAO. Which of those ones would be top priority? Or are they all top priority?
This is a very dated building.
Yeah, I know.
And some of it is safety, like, so it's just really needs to all get done. And grouping these things together should get us some efficiencies as well with contractors, right? If there's somebody who can do a large portion of this work. I think when we're talking about this project, if you approve what we're asking for right now, imagine that's what's going to get spent, because we can't guarantee any additional funds. But we have given ourselves, by moving some things to later years, a little bit of room in our gas tax funding to cushion it. And so, and as you're contributing to reserves for these kinds of facilities, we're going to see some building back so that the next project is also going to have some funding. So you may expend a fair amount of money here if we don't get anything else. But there's just really, and I'll get the acting director to come and give an opinion, being very familiar with the aquatic center, to just give us a sense of, would she deprioritize any of these things, knowing the age of the facility?
You gotta look this way, answer.
Things that Dave has listed are definitely overdue. For instance, the pool deck itself, the resurfacing is so worn out in most spots that it's slippery, not gritty anymore. The tiles throughout The whole facility are very outdated. I think they are now 32 years old as the building. He has prioritized the showers opposed to the pool decks because that is the most worn out, and it the amount of people that shower in the facility every day adds up. So those are definitely high priority. The sound system, although that doesn't sound like a high priority, it barely works to the point where it cuts in and out. It's not possible to run programs through our sound system. We have to use a speaker on the pool deck opposed to the system that we have built in. So that means we can't use the microphone or any kind of those aspects. What else is listed here? And then the shower boiler and mixing valve, we have nonstop issues with the showers being too hot, too cold. It's a constant issue that's been going on for probably 10 years. And yes, I don't think there's anything on here that is not high priority.
So the showers, yes, slippery
Your mic.
slippery floors, showers that we can't regulate the temperature in. These all become community safety issues, right?
And then again with the safety cameras and the safety glass for the front entry, that's been a priority for a while as well.
What about the TOTS pool compressor? I don't see it's on here anymore. Was that
I believe we did that
replaced?
this.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
believe it
before
was
it's
replaced
in
this year?
2024 shutdown, yes.
Okay, that's good. And the Nicola Valley Memorial Arena brine line pump replacement, was that?
I
and also?
can't comment on that one myself.
No, I think we moved that out, didn't we not?
Well, the major capital is in 2030s, but
2032, right?
yeah, there might have been a minor repair that was.
Yeah,
in the
you know what? There was
end.
the pump, there was some repair to the pump. And then the major capital for replacement of the brine lines is in 2032.
It's 2.3 now.
So the cameras and the safety glass, have there been issues in the past, or are these just preventive?
There are issues. Yes, we've had issues with people entering the pool without paying and getting past the front desk, as well as the ongoing just issue with the unhoused people entering the facility
So where's the safety glass going?
at the front desk. Similar to what the COVID plexiglass would look like, as what with a gate as well, so that they'd have to potentially buzz people through, opposed to them to being able to just walk right through, which happens quite often.
So we, in our public buildings, we're continuing to see conflict between unhoused people, I shouldn't say that, people who are experiencing potentially addictions issues. We don't want to paint all unhoused people with the same brush, because they don't all come to being unhoused for the same circumstances, but we see it in the civic center, we see it in the town hall, we see it in the mostly in the pool, less so in the arena. But all of those places have direct access to our staff. So even though in upstairs, there's that temporary plexiglass, it's not sufficient to keep our staff safe. We've had 2 break-ins in the last 2 weeks at the arena and had equipment stolen, tools and such things stolen. So we're really looking to try and theft-proof our buildings, as well as increase staff safety in those places where we can see, like, you could reach over a counter and touch our staff.
And take the cash register right with your hands, because
Yeah.
it's right there.
We don't want it.
And we have a lot of young staff throughout our facilities. It's definitely high priority.
Okay, and the last question is the civic center flooring in the 2024-2028 budget. For 2024, it was listed at 110,000. Now we have 2026, 125,000, 2027, 115,000, and 2028, 100,000.
I believe that's for all the different rooms. So I believe the auditorium is one big quote, and then rooms 2 and 3 were separate. I believe Dave had it scheduled annually, is that
So
correct?
in our December presentation, there is a table that breaks down the tranches of flooring, so it is a scope change, which is why it's being
Okay,
put forward as a new request for consideration. So 2026 is the auditorium, 2027 is foyer and bathrooms, 2028 is the meeting rooms, and then 2029 is the kitchen. So
Yes.
that is a scope change for council consideration, and that's why it appears as a new request.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just going back to the fact that a comment that the CAO made when we had a little contentious meeting the other night, where we should be able to go back to our last budget and know what's going on in the future. Well, it's really hard for me because I'm so to go back to that. Yes, thank you. I didn't want to say it out loud. To go back to that 2024-2028 budget and not see those and then how they're here. So I'm just saying that, you know,
Yes, you're right. We've added things we've identified in the last year as priorities to this new budget. So when you pass those budgets, you're actually only passing that year. The rest are projections or, you know, our best guess on when we can get things done or should get things done or what needs to get done in the next 5 years. And so when you see that difference where the CFO is talking about new, it's either we're moving it ahead or we're changing the scope. But in this case, we weren't necessarily identifying these ones as being as big an issue. And now they're being reprioritized. And that's why they're coming back into this new
So
budget.
can I ask a question of Kevin? So when we have these, like I was flipping back to your December 9th meeting and your other meeting, is it possible to have a format that we have right here? And when we make a change, you add it to it and then you give us a copy so that it's kind of always updated, so we don't have to go back. I don't know if that's possible.
That is
Kevin.
what I was attempting to accomplish with this, is to try and bridge everyone from where we landed in terms of decisions we made through committee of the whole last year, all the way to current information.
Okay, so this would be our master plan. So like if in 6 weeks we come up and say, oh, you know what, we have to do this in 2027. Could you add it to this and then redistribute it to us?
As a supplement, certainly. So if we brought forward a budget amendment during the year because there was something that emerged as a priority, or we had an emergency at a facility or otherwise, we could certainly maintain this view for reference purposes. That's no problem.
For me personally, I would really appreciate that because then I don't have to go flipping back to see when this was added and why it was added.
I've watched the conversation, so that was where this design came from.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And yes, I appreciate that. And you know what? I don't mean to criticize. I ask questions, but I appreciate all the work that you do. It's a tremendous amount of work and I do appreciate
So
it.
we're hoping that when we get to presenting you in the next budget cycle, our asset management plan, which again, really looks at those costs of replacements, you're gonna have a broader picture of those costs and things like that and priorities that they're going to help us set. Right now, again, it's funny, he's the sniff test and like is the thumb suck. They both have these things that they do, the sniff test and the thumb suck, when they're making their educated guesses, right? And we're still trying to figure out how best to change how we to produce this type of budget for you, this type of budget document. Because ultimately we want you making those very high level decisions. We don't want you to be in the weeds because that's a waste of your time. We need you to know that this service costs us this much money, and these are the things we need to do to keep maintaining this service right now. So water and sewer costs us this much money. We need to fix Kengard well so that we can use it at the capacity that we could, and we need to fix the wastewater treatment plant. Those are our two big projects, right? That's where you're like, yep, those are high priorities for our community. Those make sure that our community. So this is, last year and this year, we're just trying to find the best way to express that, because it is a different way of budgeting that has been done by municipal governments in the past. We're looking more at community priorities, and those are, our services and the big infrastructure decisions that need to, or the asset decisions that need to happen, to keep you guys high level.
And it would be nice if each time we made a decision, it was added on to this.
Yeah, so that's great
you don't
feedback.
have to keep going back.
Great feedback.
And I noticed that that's what you did. Because that's what I was doing, was going back to that December 9th, going back to 2024, et cetera. So I do appreciate that.
Councillor Richard.
Can I have a turn to talk?
Go ahead.
Do I have the permission for
You
the
do.
question asker? Okay. I almost forgot what I wanted to say, but in 2019, 2020, we did a lot of work on the arena. So it seems like we see a lot of things for the pool, but the pool's been there, since 93 or so, open.
92 it opened.
Sorry?
92.
92.
There's my expert right there.
Yeah. Well, and
Cause she lived in it.
actually, yeah, because then we had the one-way, there used to be a one-way street that
Okay,
came off
Get to your
Garcia.
point.
She can take 2 weeks to talk and barely get 5 seconds, you stuff, but hey, anyway, that electrical room has been in urgent need for years and it, you know, if we're gonna be shut down for a month, we really need to do that worthwhile. We have the chance because we could also have a failure. I think that if we plan that we're gonna go ahead with this, even though it's a lot of money, the 300,000, all the improvements, even if we don't get necessarily all the funding, if we don't and we let some things go, what are we gonna have happen if we have a major mechanical failure during the middle of spring break or swim club meet or something like that? And I just think that we just need to maybe approve these and then see what kind of funding that we get from the TNRD. I know that when we did the rodeo grounds, they had contributed quite a bit and they gave quite a donation to the curling rink as well for the roof. So I just think it seems reasonable.
Sorry, can I just, on the mechanical room, we are now not allowed to have more than a certain amount of staff weight on the mechanical room floor.
Or store anything up there or,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have to be honest.
Yeah.
I have to be honest with
couldn't
you.
Oh, it's,
Our current assessment tells us that basically 2 normal sized human beings are the only amount of additional weight that we can put on there.
When I came in 2008, it was already a problem.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Counselor Egan.
Yeah, okay. The only other thing I would suggest, in terms of this document, which I really, really like, by the way, is that I noticed that Councilor Charney's mentioned a couple of items that were on the list from last year. If they do get prioritized, you don't have to tell us that you've dropped them when you've dropped them. Just when we go to this document at this time of year, it would be nice to see the ones that either were accomplished already or they were dropped for one reason or another.
So before November or December, I provided you as part of my report, a list of our capital projects. So provide me feedback on that document because we did try to, that's what I was trying to accomplish with that document is what was completed. And yeah, and I'm trying to implement some of it, but what was completed and what is still in process and what we've had to move to the next year. So those are identified in that document. It's very big. Is that it? It's very big. It was very long. Yes. Well, it had each capital project.
Okay, and the other thing that I wanted to add to, if we're talking about security at the arena and the pool, do you have sensor lights or the cameras show the areas outside the building where
We don't have,
you wouldn't have access to seeing where people were? Or,
we don't have cameras at this
There's no
time.
we don't have any,
This is what we're
well,
asking
that's what
for.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
Do you have sensor lights out there that go on and off?
No, there is outdoor lighting that lights the sidewalks
Okay, so
around the
cameras that you're
facility.
talking about would cover that?
Yes.
Well, they'd be infrared as well.
Okay, great.
We have talked about closing the pool on Mondays. But when you brought up the idea of looking at restaffing, redoing what makes sense with pool being used at optimum times, I'd be more inclined to pull back the closure of Monday and have that process worked forward to see what that looks like. Because if we can save a significant amount of money, and I use the pool a lot, and there are times when I'm the only guy in there. And I'm serious. And then I feel bad because the lifeguards are all standing there looking at me, waiting for me to do something stupid. So I would suggest maybe we look at that aspect first before we talk about Monday closure and see what that garners us. I mean, that's just me. But if, you know, when I do look at it and we look talking about 2 lifeguards and you know, the ticket taker and all the rest of that kind of stuff, it might be an idea to look at more efficient hours. And I have to be honest with you, when we first used to be in the pool, it was open till 8:30 and it was used a lot more by, the lights would go down and it was called like an adult time sort of situation. And it was really well used back then because most people can't get there before 7:30. So rather than closing it on Monday, I'd rather see that move forward that way and see what we get out of it.
so
That's just me though.
if I could, so that, and that's what we want to show you, like, if you close it Mondays now, you get that 1% tax savings. You can reduce that tax by but you lose a day of service. We know that there's staff cost savings in doing that because we're demonstrating it. We don't know how much cost savings there will be with our evaluation, and we're not sure how long it'll take, right? Because it is one of many projects that we're all working on. However, the manager of recreation services is very familiar with the pool. She, has been the aquatic supervisor previous to her role now. Between the two of us as national lifeguard instructors, we're able to go back and evaluate how we do certain processes. Just having a conversation with her the other day about how we use our guards. We have 2 guards on all the time because all of our rescues are 2-guard rescues, which is not necessarily the modern way to do it. Some pools will operate with 1 lifeguard and nobody else in the building, and they will use bystanders for their rescues. That's not ideally where we want to go, but we don't necessarily have to have 2 guards on deck or in the building at all times. So we are going to review all those processes, but that might take time and might not find much of an impact this year until we've done and provide you guys with a report. So if council wants to see some tax reduction now, you may want to proceed with the 1-day-a-week closure, and then that may change. You may go back to 7-day-a-week operation once we know what our process is and what other efficiencies we can find. So that's on the priority list for this year to get that done.
Councilor Hogan.
When we were discussing the option of closing Mondays, we were told that that was gonna be the annual closure in September. Was not gonna happen because the work was gonna be done during Mondays. That has changed. Now we are being told that no, we are still, if we decide to go with the Mondays closure, we still have to do the 1 month shutdown. Well, just the 1 month for the regular maintenance. But when we are now adding the mechanical room, we are talking about at least an additional month, correct?
So we're looking at 3 months for the mechanical room, and that is outside of the scope of normal operations, right? So that's something we can't, we would not normally shut down for 3 months ever. But with this kind of project, we have to do a shutdown because the boilers have to come offline.
Yeah, last time we did a 3-month shutdown, it was in 2010, and we had to get the hot tubs redone, and it was similar. We were shut down from September till I believe February. Maybe it was almost 6 months. It was between 3 and 6
Yeah.
months.
And
Yeah, I think it was
what
planned for 3, but it went a little bit
happens- so
longer.
My experience with pool repairs
Yeah.
is that they're never on time. They always take longer because you start fixing one system and you're like, oh, that's broken, right? So there are 100%, there'll probably be delays for this year. If this is something we're going to, our recommendation to you is that we have to get this done. If council wants to push that back, I would tell you that I never said there wouldn't be shut down. Somebody else in the room said there wouldn't be shut down.
Well, that's probably me.
It was you. I didn't have to ring the bus.
That's what I assumed. That's what I assumed until you clarified that tonight.
For is that we set a shutdown date as our worst case scenario of a month. Our goal is always to try and reopen. We want to be heroes and reopen earlier.
So just to finalize my comment, so I understand the importance of the mechanical room.
Mhm.
So that needs to happen. So it depending of the grant, now we should allocate the money for that. So my only concern is to consider the Mondays shutdown as well as this period of time, at least not for this year, maybe something that we can consider next year. But right now we should just try to keep the pool open on Mondays.
But you did suggest that if we did shut it down on Mondays and we had the 4 days a month, the September shutdown could be shorter.
It would probably be the 3 weeks for sure, because we
Yeah.
could keep
Oh.
up everything else throughout
Thanks
the
for
year.
throwing water on our parade.
But for us to treat the main pool,
Okay,
you
thank
have
you.
to drain it,
Sure.
clean it, do your
Yeah.
thing, fill it back up. It takes minimum 2 weeks just to get that done. If
Just
they want
empty and-
maintenance on it or painting the lines or retiling or regrouting, that puts you to 3 weeks. Even to let the paint cure in the building, we have to have water out of the building, out of all the pools, because if you paint the tables and all the posts with water in there, it doesn't ever dry. You can still tacky
Running a pool
tables.
is a complex thing.
Councillor Turney.
I wouldn't mind seeing the pool closed on Monday and then the extended time for the floor and all of these other repairs that have to be done. But have we considered the lack of user fees for the 2 months? Is that being
That is
scheduled in?
already, I mean, we haven't scheduled that in for this because it's not a typical thing, right? Like, we're looking at user fees revenue as a year over year. This one, we won't make as much revenue this year because we have to close if we're gonna do the mechanical room, right? Because you can't heat the pools and because there'll be a lot of action going on. So for that 3 months for this year, yes, we will have reduced user fees, 100%.
It won't affect
over
the
this.
users though. If they have an annual pass, we do, we'll take into account those 2 months when we reopen, we would credit back
Yeah.
that time. So it wouldn't
Especially for an
affect,
extended closure.
yeah.
Councillor Baxter.
I think for this year, I think we should keep the pool open for all the days because no offense, pool closures, say 2 months or 3 months, you guys could be looking at 4 or 5 months. And this way we are not pissing them off too early. They could just wait until later.
I believe the project itself is 4 weeks. The extra month is the prep time of removing all the boilers and stuff before the contract company comes in. So I don't see it going longer than 2 months because we were told 4 weeks. So we're 2 months is kind of,
So if we
Yeah.
have our regular shutdown, we plan for a month of our regular shutdown and 2 additional months. We're hoping
Mhm.
that during that time, we'll be able to get this project.
Well, like anything else, I'm hoping that we really advertise the fact, the reason that we're shutting it down is because it's a mechanical failure we have to fix.
Oh, yes,
So
a
Councillor Ridgway.
significant safety issue.
Yeah, I think if we put it out early that we're gonna have a closure, it would help, and if we can rebate the fees, prorate them
Oh,
and their membership, that's great. Because if you've done this before, also, we have reduced revenues during the shutdown, but also the monthly cost of heating the pool is reduced for those 3
yeah.
months.
So if you buy an annual pass, it's actually only priced at 11 months.
Yeah.
Sometimes someone will buy like just a 30-day pass and they'll buy it a week before we shut down, but they don't want to pay drop-in for that week. So if they bought it a week before, then we pause it and then we start it back up after we open up. So we kind of take each person's
Yeah.
case a little bit differently, but we make sure that they don't lose any of their paid time.
That's great. But the cost of like, do we have an average of what it would cost, like heating and
So
that's a
that's
bit,
dependent on ambient temperature in
Yeah.
some time, in some cases. So we don't have we could probably find you a monthly
Mhm.
cost for heating. However, it is dependent on the temperature outside.
Yeah.
Because it's a relationship between the pool deck temperature, the temperature outside and the temperature of the water.
And the air conditioning.
And the air
Cooling,
conditioning or
yeah.
the air handling system that, so it gets complicated. We will see, we could see reductions, but the problem is that when you refill a pool, you have to, depending on how quickly you want to bring it up to temp, you actually put more energy into it. And then replacement of chemicals, right? And then, so if it's not heated properly during when we're bringing it, refilling it and bringing the chemicals back up to the right levels, then it takes a longer time for us to get balanced.
I'm only just worried that we pushed this along so
It's,
far that.
it's a significant safety risk to the staff at this point in time, and if the thing collapses, then we don't have a pool.
Yeah, and what if it dies in the middle of, no. I
Councillor
just think
Egan.
it's too long.
Thank you. Considering that we're gonna close for 1 or 2, or who knows how long, I don't think we should close on Mondays. I think that we're gonna be losing enough user fees over those couple of months that it would, there goes that 1%.
We do also see a little bit of staff savings during closure because
Do
casual
you
staff.
lose staff though?
Yeah, I don't think we'll lose any
No.
of ours.
No?
So some of them some of the permanent staff will have the opportunity to get their hours elsewhere, but casual staff won't get you.
Yeah, all of our casual staff are students and people that have other careers in town. We have a pretty
Yeah, the other thing I was
With-
thinking is, when the mayor suggested we close for maybe certain number of hours during the middle of the day, you're still gonna have to have somebody at the desk because there's gonna be people coming and going that use the gym.
And just the shower facilities
And
as well.
yes, and do you allow people to come in and just pay for a shower?
Yep.
Okay.
a lot of people do it, especially the unhoused population, which is one of the big safety risks because they don't have anywhere else to shower if they're kicked out of the shelter.
Do you find you're cleaning more because of that?
Definitely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of more safety checks. There's a lot more having to have 2 staff at the front because there's someone that you need to watch in the building. So not only it's definitely increased the workload.
Mhm. And so the idea being that we would always have a minimum of 2 people in the building. We just might not need 4.
Yes.
And so you can take those staff during your busiest times, the lifeguards in particular, during your busiest times and staff 2 there or staff 3 there rather than having always staff 2 and sometimes 2 lifeguards and the aquatic lead.
And an instructor in the water
And an
sometimes, and,
So it gets,
yeah.
again, this is where, when we're talking about the cost of running recreation programmings and making very little money, the pool is our most expensive facility and the pool users carry the lowest burden other than like field users. So, for youth hockey or youth figure skating, we charge $78 an hour for our user group in a facility that costs us less than the pool.
And we have to started to look at the numbers for just closing, or opening earlier in the day or having less lifeguards. And there will be savings, but the savings is nowhere close to what it would be closing a Monday for the whole day. If we were to stagger having 1 lifeguard in the morning or open at 10 a.m., it still would be a savings, but nothing like the 1% that's the Monday closure would do.
Councilor Egan, you done?
Oh, sorry.
Any other questions? So decision time, are we looking at the Monday closure? Yes or no? Yes. We'll have to take it to a vote. All those in favor of the Monday closure? Those opposed? Monday closure?
We will bring you the results of our evaluation, because again, although, the acting director is saying we're not going to see the same level of cost savings. You may see that we don't need our facility maintainer in the building the whole time. There might be an opportunity for us to repurpose them for parts of the day. Or, we've talked about having the arena attendant, the arena maintainers on the weekends doing some of the checks on the pool, right? So there are options for us in this department to try and find some efficiencies with our staff to again allow for more work to get done that's not been able to get done based on the way it's currently operating.
Thank you, Alex.
So with the capital projects, and are we looking to then do the entire package of work for NBC this year?
I don't see anybody opposed to it. Yep. Yep, I don't see anybody opposed to it, so. Any questions on that? I just want to give Adam Hart a attaboy and the whole ESS crew for the training. How he's moved that program forward with the badging, the uniforming, the shirts, and all of it. It goes a long way to show the community that we are ready for anything that happens when our ESS is needed. So tip of the hat. He's done an amazing job. Moving on. I have a question. Where does the museum and the senior center fall into this? Okay. 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 Thank you. I didn't read it. My mistake. I didn't read it. And the senior center. I imagine that covers both. Yeah. Okay. Questions? Oh, sorry. I'm done. My mistake. So just a quick question on the safety glass. If we put the safety glass around where Peggy sits, that still leaves the room where Stephanie and the crew sit open as well. Do we protect that part? Or what happens? Because to me, it's just as easy to hop over that half door as anything else. So if we're going to protect one part, are we going to protect all parts of it, or how does that look?
Needs of, sorry, ultimately, to meet the safety needs of that building, of this building, we need to actually do an entire retrofit. We need to redesign that reception area.
Mhm.
I don't think that that's something that we can manage in the current budget, but it is something we should continue to monitor for capital work, because the whole building needs a retrofit. We're looking at opportunities to save some money, like with the LGCAP funding, to do the lights. We're looking at energy efficiencies so that when we get to the point of have to actually, where we're like, we really need to revamp this building and what those costs are going to be, we'll have done some of the other work, and hopefully we'll be able to find through probably gas tax. There are some funding opportunities through the FCM Green Municipal Fund that the director is looking at bundling some of the work that we need to get done in here, so that we can apply on that grant, and then we can, as our matching contributions, could be looking at that work. But we're not there yet. But yes, we are aware that's a significant issue.
Other quick question before, I don't want to hog it all up. I know that during budget season, we have security sitting there. Where does that come into, the security cost of having the security? Are we going to continue to do that? I'll get you to get your microphone.
Said I had lost it. So we're not premising that contracted cost. Instead, we're looking at these capital investments in terms of cameras and
Okay.
security glass in place of that service.
Okay, that's all I wanted to
City
know.
Hall, those would wash out.
Counselor Egan, you were up first.
Thank you. I just want to go back to ACDEV, and I don't see anywhere in here where we've mentioned our designated marketing company.
Well, we haven't got there yet.
Well,
That's where they're not mentioned.
They're not mentioned.
yeah, because we don't have a contract with them.
We don't have. one of
So
them
you
yet.
don't have a budget for them because you don't have a contract with them.
Well,
We
then.
don't,
if
we don't know what
not-
they're asking for.
They have, we're not there yet.
You will be discussing some next week. They're coming in for a committee of the whole.
Because we have to consider what they might be asking for.
But they,
That
at this
that
time,
will come to you when the process happens,
yeah, at
because
this
again, you
time,
can't
they've given
guess.
us no indication of what they're looking for. Like, haven't had any communication with them about this.
Hey, well, that's not what they've told me, so,
Oh,
Manuel.
I think it's important to wait for
Yeah.
the committee of the whole, because that's gonna be a lot of information. Once we have that one, this budget needs to be done until May 15, correct?
Yeah, so we can certainly
We can
make
some
those
changes still
adjustments.
in that.
We have to.
Counselor Baxter.
So this, just so the city of Merritt knows, this is 100% to protect the workers during budget times and so that they're not coming to hurt any of our staff members.
We often have people coming into the building that we have to have removed. So we're currently, so this is an issue. People come to the city hall because they don't know who else to go to. And we are a place where they can come and vent or rant or whatever. Which is why we've had to close off the bathrooms during the day, because we were constantly finding people in various states of impairment. So staff are going into closed spaces where there are people actively using drugs or requiring first aid. So this isn't about any specific time of year. We see this regularly. Just this week, no, was it last week? We had somebody just on Friday, as we were leaving the building, the senior staff was leaving the building. There was a gentleman outside who was aggressive. Like, this is a constant thing for us here in our public buildings.
Okay, we'll transition over to the CAO office. So primarily a people cost. We do have contracted services as it relates to legal fees for most of the city operations that are not development services. And then the other 9% is primarily employee recognition. So some of the events, including the holiday party, staff breakfast, etc. Council saw in our October presentation that we've made some cuts to that in terms of phasing of costs. So that's already premised over the 5 years, the timing of Merritt branded clothing for staff, etc.
So just to refresh council's memory, we've cut the annual budget at its highest amount by about $10,000 or $12,000. And then every second year, it's lower, so that those years where it's a bit higher, we're able to give some staff swag as recognition to our employees that they wear out there in the community with pride. And then the other years that doesn't happen. We just do our more basic staff recognition activities.
Councilor Baxter.
I've had lots of people in the community wanting to purchase City of Merritt wear. So is there any way we can do a pop-up shop so we can at least get some kind of revenue coming in from being proud of our city?
So we're currently in the process of working, the acting director of community services is looking at branded community swag. So things that we can use with our new mascot, which you're going to see a briefing note on for the next council, as well as just general City of Merritt wear. So that does require a budget. So ultimately at this point, that's probably coming out of the promotional and marketing budget from ECDev, because you need to have stock purchased. And then once that stock is purchased, we hope it becomes a self-funding kind of store, right? With potentially a little bit of extra revenue. Yeah. So we're trying to pick 2 or 3 things that kids would like and 2 or 3 things that adults would be interested in, so that we have a little bit of range without too many choices and too much, because we want to be able to buy in larger bulks for those things, right? Rather than spreading ourselves thin with too many things. Sorry. Talking with my hands.
Councilor Baxter.
They only want the hats or hoodies. That's it.
They want the camel hat, by the way. That's the most requested hat, is the camel hat. Everywhere I wear it, somebody wants one.
Kevin, your mic's not on.
Oh, my mistake. Sorry.
Staying on.
Sorry, my mistake.
And then in terms of the remaining other, it's really just telephone costs and provision for bad debt expense, which is pretty minimal, given that most of our receivables that people don't pay are transferred onto property taxes. And then we're going to wrap things up with other. The other within other is large in this space, and it's really because this is where the bulk of our insurance costs sit, including our liability insurance. So property insurance will be scattered throughout all of our operations. Our insurance costs for fleet will be in all the equipment costs that you've seen. This is where the rest of our property insurance costs and then all of our liability insurance sits. We've also got 19% for telephone costs, 6% for our bank charges, and 3% interest on property tax prepayments. So interest rates have come down, so this line should also be coming down as we enter 2025. We've seen about 1.5% cut in terms of payments, but that cost did creep up to a couple $1,000s at peak interest rates over 5% over the last year.
So if I could just make a couple of comments about this section in general. I think one of the things that the residents don't see behind the scenes is the amount of work that has to go into dealing with properties. So today, Kevin, the CFO, was on the phone again with an appeal board on the assessment of a property owned by the province since 1996 that we are currently not able to collect taxes on because it's owned by the property, but we're still remitting school tax and TNRD taxes on. It's owned by the province, but because of a error in their process, it's not being considered through land titles. It hasn't been properly transferred through land titles and they won't do it. So BC Assessment is assessing it as something that it's not. So we have to pay school tax. So we're not collecting school tax on that or TNRD fees, but we're still paying them out. So this is going on since 1996. And the CFO has taken this, it's not a huge amount of money. It's just under $40,000, but every year it gets a little bit bigger. Right? And so this is something the CFO is chasing to try and deal with these inconsistencies of how we're able to collect taxes. Right? This is the province's problem, and they're shortchanging the municipality. But that involves a lot of time, getting legal opinions, making sure that the CFO is on appealed calls. It's a bit ridiculous. The other issue is that we have no ability to, so for mobile homes, for instance, we can't collect taxes on them if they're in arrears, right? Like we can't sell them. So we were able to put a lien on them, but we won't collect that money for an extended period of time if we ever do. And if in mobile home parks where individual trailers or individual homes have water and sewer bills right to them from the city, if they don't pay them, we can't collect them because that would normally go on your property taxes to be collected. So any other services that we would normally put under property taxes under the mobile homes is no longer collectible for us. So this is where when council had that discussion with the minister's office last year at UBCM about people who pay 1 year to get off the arrears to get out of the tax sale, but they're still 2 years behind and then they're 3 years behind again, and mobile homes with no ability to collect arrears, taxation and arrears, or sell those mobile homes because they're not real property, not land. But these are all things that the director is actively looking to try and recover some of these costs for the benefit of the community. But that's the kind of, other than making a budget, doing an audit, doing a year end, making sure people get paid, making sure bills get paid, that we take in money. These are the kinds of projects that staff do that city residents don't see. And that happens in every single department. What we do, you can't see, right? Because it is the things that make our community better and make our community sustainable, but we don't shout it from the rooftops. But I'm going to, because the amount of work that goes into this stuff, from the very frontline workers making decisions on tough things like, how are we repairing this leak for the 5th time? What recommendation are we making to our supervisors and managers to prioritize these problems? You can't see that decision-making process within an organization like ours. You might see that weeds don't get cut because we're dealing with 6 water main breaks. Right? You don't see that we didn't get $2.5 million in GST for several years, and then we got it because now it's not real money, right? Same thing with our war for the 286. So I think it's really important that residents understand the volume of work that goes on behind the scenes, that they'll never be front facing to them. They'll never be privy to it. It's really important, the hours that people put into these complex things to resolve many historical issues that have been dragging on, and somebody tried to fix it, it didn't happen. Then it gets left for a few years and somebody tries to fix it, it didn't happen, because barriers get put up by other levels of government.
Thank you. So thank you. Councillor Hogan.
So I think there is a lot of work that is being done. And sometimes we have to, increase the educational component. How often have you had an interview at Q101 to talk about all these achievements? Or how often have you been approached either by the newspaper or anything like that to be able to, expand this knowledge to the community?
It's interesting that you asked me this question, because I was just doing some professional development reading today and looking at an article about civic employees, especially senior leadership in civic organizations. We go in there and we do the work and we don't look for the glory, but we do take the abuse, right? And we just keep taking it, and we just keep not shouting from the rooftops all the work that we do and all the amazing things that happen, because it's just what civic employees do, right? And I think that's what leads to negative comments on Facebook, because we're not going out there and pushing what we do. We're not showing people. And that's one of the great things about having an intern this year, is because we can take this young person and teach them about the complexity of municipal government. They may not go out and reach a lot of people, but we've touched that life and said, this is a truly rewarding job to work in municipal government, but boy, is it complex, right? I have staff that we're bringing in, like, if I think about Katrina, first couple of days, we taught her about asset management. We taught her about HR stuff, with our acting director of community services. She stepped into our economic development domain because she's wanting to learn more. But as they learn more, they realize you can't, there's too much, right? Which is why we have to have the type of team that we do in order to make sure that we have the expertise we need to be able to keep this a functional organization. We certainly don't want the TNRD or the province coming in and taking over this municipality, because it would not be a benefit to the residents.
Thank you.
So we will be working on that. Like you weren't at breakfast the other day, but I said specifically to our staff, when you're doing something like, it's -30 and dark and you're in a hole fixing a water main, I want photos and I want a little caption, and you send that to our communications person and they put that out there so people see what happens. We're also going to be working on a dashboard around the types, so we can monitor, like, how many service calls do we get? How many water main breaks did we fix this year? How many sewer breaks did we fix this year? So people start to see the volume of work, because we need to show that volume of work to people.
Thank you. Councillor Hogan again.
And I just want to say that also council plays an important role on that one. So when we see those types of postings, we need to share them. We have to, so that we can, get to more people. That's part of the things that we can do. I try to do my best.
Thank you, CFO.
So.
I'm going to get to the recommendation right now. Yeah. So, recommendation that council accept the report for information and discussion purpose and provide direction on any changes that should be premised in the financial plan bylaw. Councillor Etchart, Councillor Petrosi, any questions? Hold on 1 second. We got another one to go after this. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Okay.
Oh.
Before you get on to the next part, which is actually probably the switch things to do, we're gonna give you the list generated. We just want a second to prepare it our notes so that we have each of those items as part of the resolution. Okay,
Does she want us to take a break here?
that's
5 minutes?
5 minutes each day. We actually haven't done housing and RRC, right? We haven't done housing and RRC. It's not on that because we're so.
Oh, there it is. That's, okay. So do you want me to read the recommendation? Okay. That council directs staff to prepare the 2025-2029 financial plan bylaw, including 1% contribution to fire services, services? Reserves, sorry. Fire reserves, 1% contribution to recreation, parks and land improvement reserve, remove the 3 identified summer student positions for 2025, transition to bi-weekly garbage collection in January 2026.
I just wanted to.
Council Edchart, Councillor Baxter. Any questions on this? And Celia.
And just, we haven't put it, I didn't put it in the resolution because I think it's appropriate to wait till we get to the bylaw, but this gets us in the order of around 11% tax increase this year with these changes, and keeping the pool open and things like that. So, that will come as part of the bylaw and the property tax bylaw. So.
May I ask if we could still reconsider more discussion on the Monday day closure or the Monday closure for the pool? Once we get a bit more information on what it would cost in terms of what the closure would cost us for lost revenues compared to closure on Monday and the closure happening.
Well, I think that's going to be pretty hard to do, to be honest with you, but
I think that it will definitely be part of our evaluation is that idea. So we'll bring you that as quickly as we can so that you have a good understanding of, what is the service level that's appropriate for the community, because we're trying to right size our service levels. So whether you choose a Monday closure or we choose closures in other places, reduced hours or different hours at the pool, and then how much we'll look at revenue losses based on the Monday closures and the shutdown for the work that we're gonna do. So we can kind of look at all that and bring you a report in the next few months, I think, probably.
Before we have to pass the budget.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I would say that you can make an amendment.
yeah, you can always amend the budget.
And
Okay.
you can change the level of service and then it just ends up as potentially surplus in the budget.
So I have one question to the CFO, and Councillor Charney brought this up. We have been talking about potential savings on the pipe bridge going across 400,000 possibly. That's a guesstimate. If that goes through, and that could have been a 4% drop in our, if we did it today, how does that money come into play? Because it's going to miss the budget window. Does that fall back into
all of
reserve?
the pipe bridge was premised as being funded out of the gas tax
Oh,
reserve.
right.
And
Okay.
so all that'll happen is we actually leave more in the gas tax reserve
Right.
for other projects.
Okay.
So there's no impact on taxation,
Okay.
but it gives us a little more optionality to consider other projects.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Hogan, you're up.
So regarding point number 4, I just feel like the cut in service versus the financial benefit, it's minimal. So I feel like that's something that we can consider at a later date when we have the information. And now I wouldn't be ready to vote for that one.
And that's what just put it in because it was a point of
Yeah.
discussion, so. From the amendment, I think that's up to you. We'll continue to bring you that as an option. Because you're right, it isn't about financial change, it's about service level change in other areas to offset the service level change in garbage collection.
All those in favor? Oh, Councillor Hogan, you're back on it. All those in favor? Oh. No, I think somebody would have. Then let's make them amend it. Somebody do it. Turn your mic on, Councillor Hogan.
So what CAO say?
Okay, so the mover and seconder are okay with that? Discussion on the amendment. All those in, and this is just on the amendment.
No, this is the resolution.
I have to amend the amendment. We've had this discussion before. Have agreed? This is on the amendment only. How come we keep having this problem? Everywhere else I go to does this.
So if it's just a friendly amendment, which are not official anywhere, then what you were just doing is that everybody agrees that you are changing the resolution that was moved and seconded. If you're amending the resolution that's on the floor, then there would be a new mover and a seconder to change the amendment or to change the original resolution that was on the floor. Then you vote on the change to the resolution. And then you would vote on the changed resolution as amended.
If you're clumsy, it just means it's not contentious, so we don't have to go with that.
Fine, as it sits, whatever. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you. Goodbye. We're done. Oh, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you.